Hello, friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. My name is Mason Graves. I've been with the Bureau for 6 years, working out of the Harrisburg field office. Most of my cases involve federal crimes, interstate trafficking, organized crime, the occasional white-collar case that crosses state lines. Standard procedure, predictable outcomes, evidence that follows logic. But this file was different. When it landed on my desk that October morning, it carried a red stamp. Urgent. Missing persons. Potential multi-agency. The weight of it felt wrong in my hands, not because of the thickness. It was only a few pages, but because of what those pages contained. Or rather, what they failed to contain. 3 forestry workers had vanished in Center County, Pennsylvania. Not injured, not delayed by weather, not stranded with a broken-down truck. Vanished. Their last radio contact came at 2:47 p.m. on October 11, 1994, from somewhere along Route 322 near the Tussey Mountain Overlook. The transmission was routine, weather clear, progress on schedule, estimated return by nightfall. They never made it back. The Pennsylvania State Police began their search within hours. Local volunteer groups combed the forest. Helicopters scanned the treetops. On the 3rd day, when no trace was found, no abandoned vehicle, no equipment, no footprints in the dense Appalachian brush, the case was taken over by federal investigators. That's when they called me. I arrived in the area on Friday, October 14th. The fall colors were at their peak, bright reds and golds that tourists were eager to see. But as I crossed the mountains on Route 322, I couldn't shake the feeling that this beauty was a mask. The forests here are old. Not ancient like redwoods, but old enough to remember things, old enough to hold secrets. The local state police station was a low brick building on the outskirts of State College, smelling of burnt coffee and old files. Sergeant Dale Pritchard met me in the parking lot. He was in his 50s, his face weathered from too many winters and too many unsolved cases. We shook hands. Then he led me inside without a word. The conference room was small, with fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly and a map of Center County pinned to the wall. Red circles marked the search zones. Blue pins indicated where volunteer teams had been deployed. Yellow tape outlined Route 322 from State College to the Huntingdon County line. 3 men, Pritchard began, tapping the map near Tussey Mountain. Lumber survey crew, experienced guys, all of them. Wyatt Brennan, crew chief, 42 years old, been doing forestry work for 20 years. Then there's Cole Ritter and Miles Unger, younger guys, mid-30s, but they know the woods. Not the type to wander off or get lost. What were they surveying? I asked, pulling out my notebook. Logging viability for a private contractor. They were mapping old growth sections, checking soil stability, that kind of thing. Routine work. They'd been out there for 3 days, camping near Shingletown Gap. Everything was going fine until they weren't answering their radios. I studied the map. Route 322 was a 2-lane highway that snaked through the mountains, connecting State College to the west. It wasn't a busy road, mostly locals and the occasional tourist, but it was well maintained, clearly marked. Not the kind of place where people just disappear. You said their last transmission was at 2:47 p.m., I said. I said, what exactly did they report? Pritchard pulled a folder from the stack on the table and slid it toward me. Radio logs. The dispatcher recorded everything. Brennan called in, said they were packing up for the day, heading back to their vehicle. He mentioned they were near mile marker 53, just past the Tussey Overlook. Said they'd be back at the State College depot by 1800 hours. I scanned the transcript. The words were mundane, professional. Nothing that suggested trouble, but something about the location stuck with me. Mile marker 53. That's fairly specific. Did anyone verify it? Pritchard hesitated. It was subtle, just a flicker of something behind his eyes. We tried. That's part of the problem. What do you mean? Come on, he said, standing. I'll show you. We drove out to Route 322 in Pritchard's patrol car, heading west from State College. The road climbed steadily into the mountains, the trees pressing in on either side. The sunlight filtered through the canopy in broken shafts, casting the pavement in alternating bands of light and shadow. It was beautiful in the way that remote places are beautiful, untouched, indifferent, vaguely hostile. After about 20 minutes, Pritchard slowed the car and pulled onto the shoulder near a scenic overlook. "This is Tussey Mountain," he said. According to the radio logs, the crew was somewhere around here when they made their last call. I got out and walked to the edge of the overlook. The view was stunning. Miles of forested ridges rolling away into the distance, the valleys below choked with mist. But my attention was on the road. I walked back to where we'd parked and looked for the mile marker. There wasn't one. I walked farther down the shoulder, scanning the tree line. State route markers are standard. Green rectangles with white numbers mounted on steel posts. They're placed at regular intervals, usually every mile. But here, there was nothing. No marker at 53. No marker at 52 or 54 either. "You see the problem," Pritchard said, leaning against the car. "Where are the markers?" "That's what we've been trying to figure out. We combed this stretch of road for 3 miles in either direction. Found markers at 50, 51, 55, and 56. But 52, 53, and 54, gone. Not knocked down, not stolen, just gone, like they were never there." I felt a cold prickle run down my spine. "What do you mean, never there?" Pritchard pulled out a folded map from his jacket and spread it across the hood of the car. It was a PennDOT highway map, dated 1993. His finger traced Route 322. According to this, mile markers should be here, here, and here. He tapped 3 points along the road. But when we cross-referenced with the state transportation records, it gets weird. The markers are listed in the database, but the installation dates don't match. It's like someone went back and changed the records. Changed them how? Marker 53, for example. The database says it was installed in 1987, but when we pulled the maintenance logs, there's no record of anyone ever servicing it. No inspections, no repairs, nothing. It's a ghost entry. I stared at the map, trying to process what he was telling me. So either the markers were removed recently and someone doctored the records, or they were never there to begin with, Pritchard finished. And the crew called in a location that doesn't exist. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees. I looked out at the forest, at the endless waves of green and gold stretching toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, 3 men had walked into the woods and hadn't come back, and the last place they'd reported being was a point on a map that might not be real. "We need to organize a ground search," I said, "focused on this area. I want a team in those woods by tomorrow morning." Pritchard nodded. "I'll make the calls." That night, I checked into a motel in State College and spent hours going over the case files. The missing men's backgrounds were clean. No criminal records, no financial troubles, no indication they'd wanted to disappear. Wyatt Brennan had a wife and 2 kids. Cole Ritter was engaged. Miles Unger lived alone but had a steady job and a close-knit family. None of them had any reason to vanish. but the mile marker issue gnawed at me. I called the PennDOT regional office and requested a full audit of Route 322's signage. The clerk on the other end sounded confused, but promised to have the report ready by Monday. Then I called the dispatcher who'd taken Brennan's last radio transmission and asked her to describe the call in detail. "It was normal," she said. Her voice was tired, strained. "Just a check-in. He sounded fine, maybe a little rushed, but nothing out of the ordinary. He said they were near mile marker 53 and heading back. That's it." "Did he mention anything else? Weather, terrain, anything unusual?" There was a pause. "Actually, yeah. He said something about the fog, said it was rolling in fast, which was weird because it was a clear day. But I figured it was just valley fog, you know? Happens all the time out there. Fog. I wrote it down. Underlined it twice. Fog in the mountains wasn't unusual, but the timing felt wrong. If the weather had been clear, why would fog suddenly roll in at 2:47 p.m.? I thanked the dispatcher and hung up. Then I sat in the dim light of the motel room, staring at the map spread across the bed. Route 322 looked like a thin red line cutting through a sea of green. And somewhere along that line, reality had bent just enough to swallow 3 men whole. The search began the next morning. I met Pritchard and a team of 6 state troopers at the Tussey Mountain overlook at 0600 hours. The air was cold, the sky overcast. A light mist clung to the road, making everything look washed out and gray. We geared up, radios, GPS units, first aid kits, and headed into the woods. The forest was dense, the undergrowth thick with ferns and brambles. We moved in a grid pattern, calling out every few minutes, listening for any response. The only sounds were our own footsteps and the occasional cry of a crow. The deeper we went, the more the light seemed to dim, filtered through the canopy into a greenish twilight. By midday, we'd covered about 2 square miles and found nothing. No tracks, no disturbed soil, no signs of a campsite. It was as if the crew had evaporated. We stopped for lunch near a creek, and I could see the frustration on everyone's faces. This was supposed to be a straightforward search and rescue. But there was nothing to rescue, nothing to find. "We'll keep going," Pritchard said, though his tone suggested he didn't expect results. Maybe they pushed farther west than they reported. We fanned out again, heading deeper into the mountains. The terrain grew rougher, the slopes steeper. My GPS unit flickered occasionally, the signal wavering as we moved through the valleys. I made a mental note to check the equipment when we got back. Faulty GPS was the last thing we needed out here. Around 1500 hours, one of the troopers radioed in. "I've got something." We converged on his position, a small clearing about half a mile from the road. In the center of the clearing was a cairn, a pile of stones stacked deliberately about 3 feet high. It looked old, the stones covered in moss and lichen. But on top of the cairn, sitting perfectly upright, was a green rectangle with white numbers. Mile marker 53. I stared at it, my pulse quickening. The marker was in pristine condition. No rust, no weathering, no damage. It looked like it had been placed there yesterday, but that was impossible. Pritchard and I exchanged a glance, and I could see the same unease in his eyes. "Bag it," I said, "and photograph everything." The trooper carefully lifted the marker from the cairn and placed it in an evidence bag. As he did, I noticed something carved into the stones at the base of the pile. Symbols. Not letters, not numbers, just crude, angular marks that didn't match any language I recognized. I took several photos, making sure to capture every angle. "What the hell is this?" one of the troopers muttered. "I don't know," I said. But that was a lie. I knew exactly what it felt like. It felt wrong, like we'd stumbled into something that had been waiting for us. We continued the search until dusk, but found nothing else. As we hiked back to the vehicles, the forest seemed to close in around us, the shadows deepening with every step. By the time we reached the road, it was nearly dark. I loaded the evidence into my car and told Pritchard I'd be in touch. Driving back to the motel, I couldn't stop thinking about the cairn, about the marker sitting on top of it, clean and perfect, about the symbols carved into the stones. Someone, or something, had put it there, but why? And what did it have to do with the missing crew? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the marker in my mind, the white numbers glowing against the green background. 53, a location that didn't exist, a point on a map that had swallowed 3 men, and now it had revealed itself, like a breadcrumb trail leading into the dark. I got up and spread the photos across the motel desk, studying them under the lamplight. The symbols on the cairn looked almost deliberate, like they were meant to convey something. But what? I wasn't an anthropologist or a linguist. I was just an FBI agent trying to make sense of a case that defied logic. Around 0200 hours, my phone rang. It was Pritchard. "Graves, we've got a problem." I sat up, adrenaline spiking. "What is it?" "One of the troopers who was on the search today. He's gone." My blood ran cold. Gone how? He was staying at a cabin near the search site. His girlfriend called it in an hour ago. Said he went out for a walk around midnight and never came back. "We've got units out looking, but..." Pritchard's voice trailed off. "But what?" His last known location was near the cairn. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. We both knew what it meant. "I'm coming out there," I said, already reaching for my jacket. "Graves, wait, there's something else." The girlfriend said he was acting strange after we got back. Kept saying he heard something in the woods. Said it was calling him. Calling him? Yeah, like a voice. He couldn't describe it, but he said it wouldn't stop. She thought he was just tired, spooked by the search. But now... Pritchard exhaled slowly. "I don't know what the hell is going on out here, but I don't like it." Neither did I. I hung up and grabbed my keys, heading out into the cold October night. As I drove back toward Tussey Mountain, the fog rolled in thick and heavy, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The road ahead was a tunnel of white, the center line barely visible. And somewhere out there in the dark and the mist, something was waiting. Something that had taken 3 men, and now maybe a 4th. I reached the search site just after 0300 hours. The fog was so thick I had to slow to a crawl, my headlights barely penetrating the white wall ahead. State police vehicles lined the shoulder of Route 322, their roof lights pulsing red and blue through the mist like distant beacons. Pritchard was standing near the trailhead, speaking into his radio. When he saw me, he waved me over. "Anything?" I asked. He shook his head. "We've got 6 units combing the area, but it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. The fog's making everything worse. Visibility's down to maybe 20 feet. What about K9 units? En route, should be here within the hour." He paused, looking out into the dark woods. "Graves, I've been doing this job for 23 years. I've seen people get lost, get hurt, get stupid, but this feels different." I knew what he meant. There was a weight to the air here, a pressure that made it hard to breathe, like the forest itself was watching us. "Tell me about the trooper. What's his name?" "Jude Callahan, 28 years old. Been with the state police for 4 years. Good kid, solid record. His girlfriend said he was fine when they got back to the cabin around 1900 hours. They had dinner, watched some TV, but around 2300 he started getting agitated. Said he needed to go for a walk, clear his head. She didn't think much of it until he didn't come back." "Did she hear anything, see anything?" "Nothing. She said the cabin was quiet. No strange sounds, no signs of a struggle. He just walked out the door, and disappeared. I pulled out my flashlight and checked the beam. "Show me the cabin." We hiked about a quarter-mile into the woods, following a narrow trail that wound through the trees. The fog pressed in on all sides, muffling our footsteps, turning the world into a claustrophobic gray void. Every few minutes, I'd hear a voice over the radio. Search teams checking in, reporting no contact. The repetition was maddening. The cabin was a small, rustic structure set in a clearing. A single light burned in the window, and I could see a woman standing on the porch, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. She looked young, maybe mid-20s, with long brown hair and red-rimmed eyes. She'd been crying. "Miss Callahan?" I asked as we approached. Avery Knox." Her voice was hoarse. "I'm his girlfriend. Are you with the FBI?" "Agent Graves," I said, showing my badge. "I need to ask you a few questions about tonight." She nodded and led us inside. The cabin was warm, a fire crackling in the stone fireplace. But the warmth felt hollow, like it couldn't quite chase away the chill that clung to my skin. We sat at a small wooden table, and I took out my notebook. "Tell me about Jude's behavior tonight," I said. "Start from when you got back to the cabin." Avery took a shaky breath. "He was quiet on the drive back. Didn't say much. I figured he was just tired from the search. We had dinner, and then he sat by the fire for a while. But around 11, he started pacing. I asked him what was wrong, and he said he kept hearing something." "Hearing what?" "He didn't know. He said it was like a voice. Not words exactly, but something calling to him. He kept going to the window, looking out into the woods. I told him it was probably just the wind, or maybe an animal, but he wouldn't let it go." "Did you hear anything?" She shook her head. "Nothing. It was completely quiet. That's what scared me. If there was something out there, I should have heard it too, right? But there was nothing, just silence. And then he went outside. Yeah, he said he needed to check to make sure everything was okay. I begged him not to go, but he wouldn't listen. He grabbed a flashlight and walked out the door. I watched him from the window until he disappeared into the fog. And that was the last time I saw him." I glanced at Pritchard, who was standing near the fireplace, his expression grim. "Did Jude mention anything about the search today? Anything unusual he saw or heard?" Avery hesitated. "He said something about a pile of rocks. Said it didn't feel right. Like someone had put it there on purpose, but he couldn't figure out why. He kept talking about the symbols, said they looked old, ancient even. The cairn, of course. Did he say anything else?" "Just that..." She paused, her eyes filling with tears. "He said he felt like something was watching him, like the forest was alive." A chill ran through me. I'd felt it too, that sense of being observed, of the trees leaning in just a little too close. But I couldn't say that. Not to her. Not to Pritchard. I had to stay objective, had to keep my head clear. "Thank you, Miss Knox," I said, standing. "We're going to find him, I promise." She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She didn't believe me. And honestly, I wasn't sure I believed myself. Outside, Pritchard and I stood on the porch, the fog swirling around us like a living thing. "We need to widen the search," I said. "Focus on the area around the cairn. If Callahan went back there, that's where we'll find him. And if we don't?" I didn't answer. I didn't have an answer. The K-9 units arrived just before 0400 hours, and we deployed them along the trail leading to the cairn. The dogs picked up a scent almost immediately, their handlers struggling to keep pace as they raced into the woods. Pritchard and I followed, our flashlights cutting through the fog, the beams swallowed by the darkness. The trail was steep and uneven, the ground slick with dew. My boots slipped on the wet leaves, and more than once I had to grab onto a tree to keep from falling. The dogs were relentless, their barking echoing through the forest. A frantic, desperate sound that set my nerves on edge. After about 20 minutes, the dogs stopped. We'd reached the clearing with the cairn, but something was wrong. The stones had been disturbed, scattered across the ground, no longer stacked in their deliberate pile. And in the center of the clearing where the cairn had stood was a depression in the soil, like something had been dug up or something had dug its way out. Jesus, Pritchard muttered, shining his flashlight around the clearing. What the hell happened here? I knelt beside the depression, studying the disturbed earth. It was fresh, the soil still damp. Someone, or something, had been here recently, but there were no footprints, no drag marks, nothing to indicate how the cairn had been destroyed. One of the K9 handlers called out from the edge of the clearing. "Agent Graves, you need to see this." I hurried over, and he pointed to a tree about 10 feet away. Carved into the bark was the same symbol I'd seen on the cairn stones, a series of angular lines forming a shape that looked almost like a star, but twisted, wrong. And beneath it, scratched into the bark in rough, hurried strokes, were 2 words: "Don't follow." My stomach dropped. "Bag this," I said to the handler. "I want photos of everything." "Sir," another trooper called out from the opposite side of the clearing, "we've got something." I followed him to the tree line where he was shining his flashlight on the ground. There, half buried in the leaves, was Jude Callahan's flashlight. It was still on, the beam pointing uselessly at the sky. I picked it up, my hand shaking. The lens was cracked, the casing scratched, like it had been dropped or thrown. But there was no sign of Callahan. "Spread out," I ordered. "Search every inch of this area. He can't have gone far." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, an endless maze of trees and shadows. And somewhere out there, Jude Callahan was lost. Or worse. We searched until dawn, but found nothing. No tracks, no clothing, no signs of a struggle. It was as if Callahan had simply ceased to exist the moment he stepped into the clearing. By the time the sun rose, we were exhausted, cold, and no closer to answers. Pritchard pulled me aside as the search teams regrouped. "Graves, we need to call this in. This is beyond us now. We need more resources, more manpower." "I know," I said, though the words tasted bitter. "But we're missing something. The cairn, the symbols, the missing men, it's all connected. We just need to figure out how. And what if we can't? What if this is something we're not supposed to understand?" I looked at him, saw the fear in his eyes. He was thinking the same thing I was, the thing neither of us wanted to say out loud. That maybe this wasn't a case we could solve, that maybe some things were better left alone. But I couldn't accept that. Not yet. Back at the motel, I spent the morning going over every piece of evidence we'd collected. The mile marker, the symbols, the cairn, the warnings carved into the tree. I laid it all out on the bed, trying to see the pattern, the connection. But the more I looked, the less sense it made. Around noon, my phone rang. It was the PennDOT clerk I'd spoken to earlier. "Agent Graves, I've got that report you requested, but, there's a problem." "What kind of problem?" "Well, according to our records, mile markers 52, 53, and 54 on Route 322 were never installed. The database entries you were asking about? They're listed, but they're flagged as pending approval, meaning they were proposed but never actually put in." I sat up, my heart pounding. "What do you mean, never installed?" "I mean, they don't exist." They were part of a signage upgrade project back in 1987, but the project was canceled before those markers were ever placed. The entries were supposed to be deleted from the system, but someone must have missed them. So, technically, those markers have been sitting in the database for 7 years, even though they're not real. Not real, I repeated, my voice hollow. Yeah, I mean, we've got the physical markers in storage, never used, still in their original packaging. If you want, I can send you photos to confirm. Do that, I said, and hung up. I stared at the evidence bag on the bed, at the mile marker inside. Pristine, perfect, impossible. If the markers were never installed, then where did this one come from? My radio crackled to life. Agent Graves, this is Sergeant Pritchard. We've got another situation. I grabbed the radio. What is it? One of the search teams just radioed in. They're at a location about 2 miles west of the cairn. They found something. You need to get out here, now. I was back in my car within minutes, speeding down Route 322. The fog had lifted slightly, but the sky remained overcast, heavy with the promise of rain. I followed Pritchard's directions, turning off onto a logging road that cut deeper into the mountains. The road was rough, barely more than a dirt track, and my car bounced over ruts and exposed roots. After about 15 minutes, I saw the search team's vehicles parked in a small clearing. I pulled up beside them and got out, jogging over to where Pritchard was standing with 3 troopers. They were all staring at something on the ground. "What is it?" I asked. Pritchard didn't answer. He just pointed. I looked down and felt my blood turn to ice. It was a boot. A state trooper's boot, still laced, still tied, and inside it, half rotted and covered in moss, was a human foot. "That's Callahan's boot," one of the troopers said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I saw him wearing it yesterday." I knelt beside the boot, my mind racing. The decomposition was wrong. Callahan had been missing for less than 12 hours. There was no way his body could have decayed this much in that time. But here it was, undeniable. The flesh was gray and shriveled, the bones visible beneath the sagging skin. "Bag it," I said, though my voice sounded distant, disconnected. "And search the area. There might be more." There was. Over the next hour, we found pieces scattered across the clearing. A femur, a rib cage, fragments of a skull. All of them showed the same advanced decomposition, like they'd been lying here for weeks, or months, or years. But the clothing was fresh. The uniform was intact, the fabric barely worn. The badge still gleamed. "This doesn't make sense," Pritchard said, his voice tight. "None of this makes sense." I didn't respond. I was staring at the fragments, at the impossible juxtaposition of fresh clothing and ancient bone. And then I saw it. Carved into the femur, barely visible beneath the layer of moss, was the same symbol from the cairn, the twisted star. "Pack everything up," I said, standing. "We're taking this back to the lab." "Graves, what the hell is going on?" "I don't know," I said, and for the first time I realized I might never know. That night, I sat in the motel room, staring at the evidence photos spread across the desk. 4 men gone. 4 men who'd walked into the Pennsylvania woods and never come back, and the only thing connecting them was a mile marker that didn't exist and a symbol I couldn't decipher. I called the Harrisburg office and requested a forensic anthropologist and a linguist. If I was going to make sense of this, I needed experts. People who could look at the evidence and see something I was missing. But even as I made the calls, I knew it wouldn't be enough. Because whatever was happening in these woods, it wasn't something that could be explained by science or logic. It was something else. Something older. Something that didn't want to be found. And it was still out there, waiting. The forensic anthropologist arrived 2 days later. Her name was Dr. Evelyn Marsh, a specialist in skeletal analysis from the University of Pittsburgh. She was in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. If anyone could make sense of the remains we'd found, it was her. We met at the state police barracks, where the evidence had been temporarily stored in a refrigerated unit. Pritchard and I watched as Dr. Marsh unpacked the fragments, laying them out on a steel examination table with practiced precision. She worked in silence, her gloved hands moving quickly, sorting bone from clothing, cataloging each piece. After about an hour, she looked up. "This is unusual." "Unusual how?" I asked. She picked up the femur, turning it over in her hands. "The decomposition pattern is inconsistent with the timeline you've given me. If these remains have only been exposed for 12 hours, they shouldn't look like this. The soft tissue should be largely intact, with minimal decay. But what I'm seeing here suggests weeks, maybe even months of exposure. Could the environment have accelerated the process? The cold, the moisture? To some extent, yes, but not like this. And there's something else." She pointed to the bone's surface. "See these striations? They're not consistent with natural weathering or animal activity. They look almost deliberate, like something carved them." I leaned closer, studying the marks. They were faint but unmistakable, thin, parallel lines running along the length of the bone. And in the center, barely visible, was the twisted star symbol. "Can you tell me anything about the person this belonged to?" I asked. "Doctors." Marsh set the femur down and pulled out a magnifying glass, examining the skull fragments. "Male, mid to late 20s, Caucasian based on the cranial structure. No signs of trauma to the skull, so cause of death wasn't a blow to the head. But without the rest of the remains, it's hard to say for sure. Could this be Jude Callahan?" She hesitated. "The age and sex match, but I'd need dental records to confirm. Do you have them?" "I'll get them," I said, though my gut already told me what the answer would be. The dental records confirmed it the next day. The remains belonged to Jude Callahan, a man who'd been alive 48 hours ago, a man whose body had somehow aged months in the span of a single night. Dr. Marsh had no explanation. Neither did I. The linguist arrived that afternoon. His name was Dr. Aaron Hale, a professor of ancient languages from Penn State. I'd sent him photos of the symbols we'd found on the cairn and the tree, and he'd agreed to come out and take a look. We met at the search site, near the destroyed cairn. The fog had returned, thicker than before, turning the forest into a ghostly labyrinth. Dr. Hale was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with wire-rimmed glasses and an eager energy that seemed out of place in the oppressive gloom. "This is fascinating," he said, kneeling beside the tree where the symbols were carved. He traced the lines with his finger, muttering to himself. "Absolutely fascinating. Do you recognize it?" I asked. "Not exactly, but the structure is reminiscent of Proto-Indo-European glyphs, pre-Celtic, maybe even older. The angular shapes, the way they're arranged, it's almost like a warning." "A warning of what?" He stood, brushing dirt from his knees. "That's the problem. Without more context, it's hard to say. But if I had to guess, I'd say it's a boundary marker. Something to indicate that this area is off limits, sacred, maybe, or dangerous." "What about the words carved below it? Don't follow." Dr. Hale frowned. "That's modern English. Whoever carved those symbols didn't write that. Someone else did, recently." I felt a chill run through me. Callahan. Possibly. If he came out here and saw the symbols, he might have carved the warning for others. But that raises the question. Why? What did he see that made him think people shouldn't follow? I didn't have an answer. but I had a growing suspicion that Callahan had known more than he'd let on, that he'd seen something out here, something that had terrified him enough to leave a warning, and then he'd walked deeper into the woods anyway. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Callahan's warning, about the symbols, about the mile marker that didn't exist. Every piece of evidence pointed to something impossible, something that defied logic. But I was an FBI agent. My job was to find answers, to follow the evidence wherever it led, even if it led into the dark. Around 0200 hours, I got dressed and drove back out to Route 322. I didn't tell Pritchard, I didn't tell anyone. I just needed to see it for myself, to walk the same path the missing men had walked. Maybe then I'd understand. The fog was so thick I could barely see the road. I drove slowly, my headlights casting weak beams into the white void. When I reached the Tussey Mountain overlook, I pulled over and got out. The silence was absolute. No wind, no animals, no distant hum of traffic, just silence. I turned on my flashlight and started walking down the trail toward the cairn clearing. The forest felt different at night. The trees seemed taller, the shadows deeper. My flashlight beam barely penetrated the darkness, and more than once I had to stop and check my GPS to make sure I was still on the trail. The device flickered, the screen glitching, but it kept working. Barely. After about 20 minutes, I reached the clearing. The cairn was still destroyed, the stones scattered. I knelt beside the depression in the soil and shone my light into it. It was deeper than I'd realized, maybe 3 feet down. The edges were smooth, almost polished, like something had burrowed through the earth. I stood and swept my flashlight across the clearing. That's when I saw it. On the far side of the clearing, just beyond the tree line, was another mile marker, number 53. It was standing upright, perfectly placed, as if it had always been there. But I knew it hadn't. We'd searched this area a dozen times. There was no marker here. I walked toward it, my pulse racing. The closer I got, the more wrong it felt. The air around it was colder, the silence more oppressive. And then I heard it. A voice. It was faint, barely audible, like a whisper carried on the wind. But it was there. Calling, I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The voice was coming from beyond the marker, deeper into the woods. It wasn't speaking words, not exactly. It was more like a hum, a resonance that vibrated through my chest. And it was pulling me forward. I took a step. Then another. My flashlight beam wavered, the batteries dying. The voice grew louder, more insistent. I could feel it in my bones, in my skull, a pressure building behind my eyes. Another step. The marker was right in front of me now. I reached out to touch it, my fingers brushing the cold metal. And then, my GPS unit screeched, the screen flashing white. I stumbled back, the spell broken. The voice stopped. The silence returned. I ran. I didn't think, didn't look back. I just ran, crashing through the underbrush, my flashlight dead, the darkness swallowing me whole. I didn't stop until I reached my car, my lungs burning, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove back to the motel, my mind reeling. I'd heard it. I'd felt it. Whatever was out there, whatever had taken those men, it had tried to take me too. The next morning, I called Pritchard and told him we needed to shut down the search. He didn't argue. He'd seen the look in my eyes when I walked into the barracks, and he knew. We both knew. The case was officially closed on November 2nd, 1994. The official report stated that the missing men had likely succumbed to exposure and that their remains would be recovered when conditions permitted. But no further searches were conducted. No remains were ever found. The evidence, the mile marker, the symbols, the bones, was sent to the FBI's evidence response team in Quantico. I never heard back. When I followed up months later, I was told the materials had been misplaced during processing. I left the Bureau 3 years later. I couldn't do it anymore, couldn't keep pretending that the world made sense, that there were answers to every question. Because I knew better now. I'd seen what was out there, lurking in the Pennsylvania woods, and it was still there, waiting. The case file sat in my desk drawer for nearly a decade. I'd take it out sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep, and read through the reports. The transcripts of witness interviews, the forensic analyses that went nowhere, the photographs of symbols that no one could identify. Each time I'd hoped to see something I'd missed, some detail that would finally make sense of what happened in those woods. But there was never anything new, just the same unanswered questions, the same gnawing sense that I'd walked away from something important. Or maybe I'd walked away from something I was never meant to find. In 2003, I got a call from Sergeant Dale Pritchard. We hadn't spoken in years, not since I'd left the Bureau. His voice was older, rougher, like the mountains had worn him down the same way they'd worn me down. "Graves," he said. "I thought you should know. We found something." My chest tightened. "What did you find?" "Another one. Mile marker 53. Same condition as the one you bagged, sitting in the middle of Route 322, right where you'd expect it to be. But it wasn't there yesterday. I drive that road every day. It just appeared." I sat down heavily, my hands gripping the edge of the table. Where, exactly? Tussey Mountain Overlook, same spot. He paused. "We pulled the traffic camera footage from the last 48 hours. There's nothing. One frame, the road is empty. Next frame, the marker is there. No vehicle, no person, no explanation." "What did you do with it?" "Nothing yet. I wanted to call you first." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Graves, I think it's still happening. Whatever took those men, whatever you saw out there, it's still active. Don't touch it," I said. "Leave it exactly where it is." "Why?" "Because I didn't know what would happen if someone moved it. Because the last time we'd interfered, people had died. Because some doors, once opened, can't be closed again." "Just leave it," I repeated, "and don't let anyone go near it." Pritchard was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know something. Something you didn't put in the report." I didn't respond. "What did you see out there, Graves?" I wanted to tell him, wanted to explain how the forest had pulled at me, how the voice had called me deeper, how I'd felt myself starting to slip away into something vast and hungry. But I couldn't, because saying it out loud would make it real, and I'd spent 9 years trying to convince myself it wasn't. "I saw what happens when you follow," I said finally, "and I saw what happens when you don't." I hung up before he could ask anything else. That night, I burned my copy of the case file, watched the pages curl and blacken in my fireplace, the photographs dissolving into ash. The symbols, the cairn, the mile marker, all of it reduced to smoke and memory. I told myself it was over, that I'd finally let it go. But I hadn't, not really, because 3 months later I drove back to Pennsylvania. I didn't plan to. I was passing through on my way to visit family in Ohio, and I took Route 322 without thinking. It was late afternoon, the autumn light slanting through the trees in golden shafts. The road looked the same as it had in '94, winding, quiet, peaceful, like nothing had ever happened there. I pulled over at the Tussey Mountain Overlook and got out. The air was cool, crisp, with the smell of pine and decaying leaves. I walked to the edge of the lookout and stared out at the endless forest rolling away into the distance. And then I saw it, Mile marker 53, standing on the shoulder of the road, exactly where a mile marker should be. Green metal, white numbers, official PennDOT insignia at the bottom. I walked over to it slowly, my heart pounding. It looked real, solid, permanent, like it had been there for decades. But I knew better. I reached out and touched it. The metal was cold, smooth, normal. But when my fingers brushed the surface, I felt it again. That pull, that resonance in my chest. The voice, faint but there, humming beneath the surface of reality. I jerked my hand back and stumbled to my car. I didn't look at the marker again. I just got in, started the engine, and drove. I didn't stop until I crossed the state line into Ohio. That was 7 years ago. I haven't been back to Pennsylvania since. But I still think about it sometimes. About the men who disappeared, about Jude Callahan's warning, about the voice in the woods that wanted me to follow. And I think about mile marker 53, standing on Route 322, waiting. Because that's what it does. It waits for the next person to get too close, to ask too many questions, to step across a boundary they can't see. Last month I received a package in the mail. No return address, no note, just a photograph inside. It was a traffic camera image, date stamped 2 weeks prior. Route 322, Tussey Mountain Overlook. The road was empty except for a single figure standing beside mile marker 53. The image was grainy, taken at night, but I could make out enough detail to see that the figure wasn't moving. Just standing there, facing the woods. I turned the photograph over. On the back, someone had written a single sentence in neat, careful handwriting. They're still looking for it. I don't know who sent it. I don't know what it means. But I know this. The case isn't closed. It never was. Because 5 days ago, I got a call from the Pennsylvania State Police. They wanted to know if I'd be willing to consult on a new missing persons case. 3 hikers had vanished near Tussey Mountain. Last known location, Route 322, near mile marker 53. I told them I couldn't help. Told them I was retired, that I didn't do field work anymore. But the truth is, I'm afraid. Afraid of what I'll see if I go back. Afraid of what I'll hear if I listen too closely. Afraid that this time I won't be able to walk away. The file is still in my drawer. I've never been able to throw it away, even after burning my copy. This one is different. It's the original bureau file, the one they said was lost. It arrived on my doorstep a year after I left the FBI, in a plain manila envelope with no markings. Inside the file, tucked between the last 2 pages, is a single piece of paper I don't remember seeing before. It's a PennDOT work order from 1987, authorizing the installation of mile markers 52, 53, and 54 on Route 322. At the bottom, there's a handwritten note in faded ink, installation canceled. Crew refused to complete work. Reported anomalous conditions at site. Recommend area be flagged for review. Below that, someone else had written in different handwriting. Review denied. Site cleared. No further action required. And below that, in a third hand, barely legible. They were wrong. I've stared at that note for hours, trying to decipher who wrote it, what they meant. But there are no names, no signatures. Just 3 sentences that tell me what I've suspected all along. Someone knew. Before the forestry crew disappeared, before Jude Callahan walked into the woods, before I ever set foot in Center County, someone knew there was something wrong with that stretch of road. And they covered it up. I don't know why. I don't know what they were trying to hide. But I know that mile marker 53 is still out there, standing on Route 322, waiting for the next person to find it. And when they do, it'll take them just like it took the others. I've thought about going back. about trying to finish what we started in 1994. But I know how that ends. I've seen it, felt it, and I'm not ready to follow where it leads. Not yet. But some nights, when I can't sleep, I pull out the file and look at the photographs. The cairn, the symbols, the twisted star carved into bone and bark, and I wonder if somewhere in those marks is an answer, a way to stop it. Or maybe they're just a warning. Don't follow. I should have listened. On November 2nd, 1994, I recommended this case be closed due to lack of evidence and viable leads. The official record states that the missing persons likely succumbed to environmental exposure. No bodies were recovered. But 20 years later, I can't stop thinking about what the Pendiot record said. About the work order that was never completed. About the crew who refused to install those markers because of anomalous conditions. They saw something, just like I did, just like everyone who gets too close. In 2014, the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation completed a full audit of Route 322's signage. According to their report, all mile markers are present and accounted for, including markers 52, 53, and 54. But when I checked the installation date for marker 53, the database showed it as unknown. No contractor, no work order, no record of who placed it there or when. It's just there, like it's always been there. And according to traffic records, every 18 months, almost to the day, there's an incident near that marker. A missing person, an abandoned vehicle, a hiker who wandered off trail and never came back. The pattern holds. Consistent, predictable, inevitable. I wanted to believe there was an explanation, a rational cause for everything we found. But I was wrong. Some places don't follow the rules. Some places exist outside the boundaries of what we understand. And Route 322, somewhere near the Tussey Mountain Overlook, is one of them. The Bureau closed the case. But the case was never really closed. It's still open, still waiting, and I think it always will be. I'm Dalton Briggs, and I've been conducting federal investigations for 9 years. Most of that time has been spent in Pittsburgh, working cases that make sense. Embezzlement, interstate fraud, organized crime networks that operate with predictable patterns. Numbers on spreadsheets, bank records, wire transfers, things you can track, verify, prove in court. The Hermitage steel plant case was nothing like that. It started with a phone call from the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission on March 8, 1996. A billing analyst named Ruth Kellerman had flagged an anomaly in the electricity consumption records for an abandoned industrial facility in Mercer County. The Hermitage steel plant had been shuttered since May 1, its machinery sold off, its buildings left to rust. Yet according to PUC records, the facility was still drawing power. A lot of power. How much are we talking about? I asked Kellerman during our initial call. Approximately 240,000 kilowatt-hours per month, she said. That's roughly equivalent to a facility running 2 full production shifts. I wrote the number down, underlining it twice. For how long? That's the strange part, Agent Briggs. The consumption pattern started in December 1995, about 4 years after the plant closed. Before that, there was minimal draw, just security lighting, maybe some administrative offices. But then, suddenly, it spiked, and it's been consistent ever since. Who's paying the bill? That's where it gets complicated. The account is still registered under Hermitage Steel Corporation, which went bankrupt in '92. The payments are being automatically divided from an escrow account set up during the bankruptcy proceedings. Nobody's monitoring it. The money just goes out every month. I leaned back in my chair, staring at my notes. An abandoned steel plant drawing enough power to run active production lines. payments coming from a dead company's escrow account. It didn't make sense, but it also didn't sound like a federal matter. Until Kellerman added one more detail. "Agent Briggs, there's something else. We sent an inspector out there last week to check the meters. He never filed his report. When we called him, he said he couldn't go back there, wouldn't explain why, just said he was refusing the assignment and that we should contact law enforcement." That changed everything. I drove out to Hermitage on March 11th. The town sits in the northwestern corner of Pennsylvania, just south of the Ohio border. It's one of those Rust Belt communities that thrived when American steel was king and withered when the mills closed. Empty storefronts line Main Street. Houses with sagging porches. Bars with pickup trucks parked outside at 2 in the afternoon. The steel plant sat on the eastern edge of town. A sprawling complex of corrugated metal buildings, skeletal smokestacks, and rusted rail lines. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, topped with barbed wire. Signs every 50 feet. No trespassing. Property of Hermitage Steel Corp. Violators will be prosecuted. I parked at the main gate and got out. The wind cut across the empty lot, carrying the smell of rust and decay. The gate was chained shut, but the padlock looked new. I examined it closely. No rust, no weathering. Someone had been here recently. Beyond the fence, the plant loomed like the skeleton of some massive beast. Most of the windows were broken, their frames jagged with shards of glass. Graffiti covered the lower walls, tags and crude drawings left by teenagers looking for thrills. But higher up, on the second and third floors, I could see lights, faint yellow, flickering slightly, like fluorescent tubes struggling to stay lit. I pulled out my phone and called the local sheriff's office. A deputy named Warren Teague answered. "Sheriff's office. This is FBI Special Agent Dalton Briggs. I'm at the Hermitage Steel Plant conducting a federal investigation. I need to speak with whoever's responsible for securing the property." There was a pause. The steel plant. That place has been locked down for years. Nobody goes in there. Well, someone's been paying the electric bill, and I can see lights on inside. Another pause, longer this time. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Deputy Teague arrived in a Mercer County Sheriff's cruiser. A stocky man in his 40s with a weathered face and cautious eyes, he got out slowly, looking at the plant like it might bite him. "You said you see lights?" he asked. I pointed to the upper floors. "Third floor, east wing, fluorescent by the look of it." Teague squinted, then nodded. "Huh. Yeah, I see 'em. That's new." "New as in recent." "New as in I've driven past this place 100 times, and I've never seen lights on before." He walked over to the gate, examining the chain. "This lock's been changed. We cut the old one off about 6 months ago after some kids got in and nearly fell through a rotten floor. Put our own lock on, keyed to the department. But this isn't ours. Can you get us in?" Teague looked at me, then at the plant, then back at me. "You sure you want to go in there?" "Why wouldn't I?" "Because the last guy who went in there, the utility inspector, came out looking like he'd seen a ghost. Told the sheriff he heard things. Machinery running, voices talking, footsteps on metal catwalks, said it sounded like the plant was still operating." I felt a cold trickle down my spine, but kept my expression neutral. "Did the sheriff follow up?" "Sent a patrol in to check. They didn't find anything. No squatters, no equipment running, no sign of recent activity. But they also said they heard things, echoes, maybe. The place is huge. Sound carries weird in buildings like that. But it spooked them enough that the sheriff decided not to send anyone else in unless absolutely necessary." "It's necessary now," I said. "I need to verify the electrical consumption and determine who's using the facility. If you'd prefer, I can go in alone." Teague sighed, pulling a pair of bolt cutters from his trunk. No, I'll go with you. But we stick together, and if anything feels off, we leave. Deal? Deal. He cut the chain, and the gate swung open with a metallic shriek that echoed across the empty lot. We walked through, our footsteps crunching on gravel and broken glass. The main building loomed ahead, its entrance a massive roll-up door large enough to drive a truck through. It was closed, but a smaller personnel door beside it stood slightly ajar. I drew my sidearm. Teague did the same. We approached the door slowly, listening. The wind whistled through broken windows above us, but beneath that, I heard something else. A low hum, almost subsonic, like machinery running far away. I pushed the door open. The interior was dark, the only light coming from the doorway and the broken windows high above. Dust hung in the air, thick enough to see. The space was enormous, a cathedral of rust and shadow. Overhead, massive steel beams crisscrossed the ceiling. Below, the remnants of the production floor stretched into the darkness. Conveyor systems, hydraulic presses, smelting furnaces all silent and still. Except they weren't entirely still. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed something wrong. The machinery looked old, covered in rust and grime, but some of the control panels were lit, green LEDs glowing faintly in the gloom. Digital readouts displaying numbers that scrolled slowly across tiny screens. Jesus, Teague whispered. That's new. We moved deeper into the plant, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The hum grew louder, resonating through the floor beneath our feet. And then I heard it. A voice. Distant, muffled, like someone speaking through a wall. I froze, raising my hand to signal Teague. We listened. The voice came again, clearer this time. Male, calling out instructions. Section 4, advance the line. Check the temperature on furnace 2. I looked at Teague. His face had gone pale. That's not possible, he said. There's nobody in here. We checked. But the voice continued, joined now by others. A woman's voice responding. Temperature holding at Dowdy 200, ready for next batch. Another man, farther away. Conveyors jammed on the west side. Need a maintenance crew. The voices overlapped, creating a cacophony of industrial dialogue. Orders given, reports received, machinery adjusted. It sounded like a fully staffed production shift. But there was no one here. Just us, standing alone in the darkness. We need to find the source, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Could be a recording, something rigged to play on a loop. Teague nodded, though he didn't look convinced. We followed the voices through the plant, navigating between silent machines and around rusted equipment. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the walls, distorting in the vast space. At one point, I thought I saw movement on one of the catwalks above. A shadow passing in front of a broken window, but when I aimed my flashlight up, there was nothing. The voices led us to the east wing, where the lights were visible from outside. We climbed a metal staircase, each step groaning under our weight. The second floor was more intact than the ground level. Offices and administrative spaces, their doors hanging open or missing entirely. Papers littered the floor, yellowed and brittle. A calendar on one wall still showed November 1991. The voices were louder here. I could hear them through the walls, clear as day. Men and women discussing production quotas, equipment malfunctions, break schedules. Normal factory conversation. Except there was no one here. We reached the third floor. The lights were brighter now, fluorescent tubes buzzing overhead. Some of them flickered, casting the hallway in strobing shadows. At the end of the hall, a door stood closed. Light spilled from the gap beneath it, and from inside, I heard the voices, right there just beyond the door. I approached slowly, Teague behind me. I reached for the handle, my hand trembling slightly. The metal was warm to the touch. I turned it, pushed the door open, and the room was empty. It was a conference room, with a long table and metal chairs. Whiteboards on the walls covered in faded writing. Production schedules, safety protocols, efficiency charts. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh white light across the space. But there was no one there. The voices had stopped the moment I opened the door. Teague exhaled slowly. What the hell is this? I walked into the room, examining every corner. No speakers, no recording equipment, no hidden devices. Just an empty room with old furniture and flickering lights. I pulled out my radio and keyed the mic. "This is Agent Briggs. I'm inside the Hermitage steel plant, 3rd floor, east wing. Requesting backup and a technical team. We've got an active electrical system and unexplained audio phenomena." "Copy?" Static answered me. I tried again, nothing. "Radio's dead," I said. Teague checked his own. Same result. "Mine too. Interference, maybe?" Maybe, but I didn't believe it. We searched the rest of the floor, finding more empty rooms, more lights burning for no reason. In one office, a computer monitor was on, displaying a login screen for a system that shouldn't have power. In another, a coffee maker sat on a desk, the pot half full, steam rising from the spout. I touched the pot. It was hot. "We need to leave," Teague said. His voice was tight, controlled. "Right now." I wanted to argue, wanted to keep investigating, but he was right. Something was wrong here, something beyond electrical anomalies and phantom voices. We retraced our steps, descending the stairs, moving quickly through the ground floor toward the exit. And then the voices started again. Behind us, around us, everywhere. The factory coming to life, shift workers arriving, machinery warming up. I heard the clang of metal on metal, the hiss of hydraulics, the rumble of furnaces igniting. But when I looked back, there was only darkness and silence. We ran. Didn't stop until we burst through the personnel door and into the daylight. The sounds cut off immediately, like a switch had been flipped. We stood in the parking lot, breathing hard, staring at the building. "What did we just hear?" Teague asked. I didn't have an answer, not one that made sense. That night, I sat in my motel room, writing my initial report. But I couldn't find the words to describe what had happened. Phantom voices weren't something you put in an FBI field report. Mysterious coffee pots and glowing computer screens weren't evidence of a crime. They were impossible. But they had happened. I'd seen them, heard them. And I had a witness. I called the Pittsburgh field office and requested a full investigation team. Agents with technical expertise, audio analysis capabilities, and experience with industrial facilities. They told me they'd have a team on site within 48 hours. In the meantime, I went back to the plant, alone. I arrived just after midnight, parking at the gate. The chain was still cut, the lock hanging loose. I grabbed my flashlight, my sidearm, and a digital recorder. If there were voices in there, I was going to capture them. The plant was darker at night, more oppressive. My flashlight beam seemed weaker, swallowed by the vast emptiness. I moved through the ground floor quickly, heading straight for the east wing staircase. The voices started before I reached the second floor. Louder this time, clearer. I could make out individual words, sentences, entire conversations. And I recognized some of the voices, not personally, but the cadence, the terminology. These were real steel workers talking about real work, but they were talking about it in present tense, as if the plant was still operating. I reached the third floor and positioned myself outside the conference room. The recorder was running, the red light blinking. I listened. "Temperature's dropping on furnace 3. Need to adjust the oxygen mix." "Copy that. Increasing flow by 15%. How's the yield on the last batch? 92%, well within spec. I took notes, documenting every word. The conversation continued for nearly 20 minutes. Routine factory operations. Nothing unusual except for the fact that no one was there. And then, abruptly, the voices changed. Do you hear that? Hear what? Someone's here, in the building. My blood ran cold. They were talking about me. 3rd floor, I think, near the conference room. Should we check it out? No, let's just finish the shift. Keep your head down. The voices dropped to whispers, too quiet for me to make out. I stood frozen, my heart pounding, the recorder still running. And then footsteps. Metal footsteps on the catwalk above me, moving quickly, purposefully, coming closer. I bolted, ran down the stairs, through the ground floor, out into the night. I didn't stop until I was in my car, doors locked, engine running. I sat there, shaking, staring at the plant. The recorder was still in my hand. I rewound it and hit play. Static, just static. 20 minutes of white noise. The voices weren't on the recording. The technical team arrived on March 13th. 4 agents from the Pittsburgh office. Lawson Hale, a senior investigator with 20 years in the Bureau, Harper Quinn, an electronics specialist, Marcus Sloan, a forensic analyst, and Avery Knox, a junior agent with a background in industrial engineering. I briefed them in the parking lot of the Hermitage Motor Lodge, laying out everything I'd observed: the electrical consumption, the phantom voices, the coffee pot, the failed recordings. Hale listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he glanced at the others, then back at me. You're telling me you heard full conversations, multiple speakers, but got nothing on the recorder? That's correct. And Deputy Teague corroborated the voices? He did. I can have him come in if you want a formal statement. Hale nodded slowly. We'll need that. But first, let's go see this place for ourselves. Quinn, bring the electromagnetic scanner and the thermal imaging camera. Sloan, I want you documenting everything. Knox, you're with me and Briggs. We geared up and drove to the plant in 2 vehicles. The day was overcast, the clouds low and heavy with the promise of rain. The plant looked different in daylight, less menacing, more pathetic. Just a ruined building slowly being reclaimed by nature. But the lights were still on. We cut a new chain and entered through the same personnel door I'd used before. The interior was exactly as I remembered. Vast, dark, filled with the hulking shapes of abandoned machinery. But this time, with 5 of us and professional equipment, it felt more manageable, less like stepping into another world. Quinn immediately pulled out the electromagnetic scanner and began sweeping the area. The device crackled and chirped, detecting the ambient electrical field. She frowned at the readout. This is weird. I'm getting massive EM readings, but they're not consistent. It's like the power is cycling on and off, but there's no pattern. And the source? She turned in a slow circle, watching the scanner. It's everywhere. The entire building is lit up. What does that mean? Knox asked. It means the electrical system is active, but it shouldn't be. There's no main power line connected to the grid, at least there shouldn't be. Hale pulled out a flashlight. Let's find the electrical room, see what's actually running. We navigated through the ground floor, following Quinn's directions. The electromagnetic readings grew stronger as we moved deeper into the plant, leading us to a metal door marked electrical. Authorized personnel only. It was unlocked. Inside, the electrical room was surprisingly intact. Circuit breakers lined the walls, their labels faded but still legible. And in the center of the room stood the main distribution panel, a massive metal cabinet covered in switches and gauges. Most of them were in the off position, but several were flipped to on, their indicator lights glowing green. Quinn approached the panel, scanner in hand. These circuits are active. They're feeding power to... Let me see. She traced the labels. Third floor lighting, second floor HVAC, ground floor control systems, and something listed as production floor alpha. Production floor alpha? I said. What's that? Knox pulled out a set of blueprints we'd obtained from the county records office. She unfolded them on the floor, and we crouched around them. According to these, production floor alpha is the main smelting and casting area. That's where the furnaces would have been. Let's check it out, Hale said. We left the electrical room and headed west, deeper into the plant. The production floor was a nightmare of rusted metal and broken concrete. The furnaces loomed like sleeping giants, their mouths dark and cold. Conveyor systems stretched into the shadows, their belts torn and sagging. Everything was silent, motionless, but the control panels were on, every single one. Green lights blinked across the boards. Digital readouts displayed temperatures, pressure levels, flow rates, all within normal operating parameters. As if the furnaces were running, but they weren't. They were cold, dead, empty. How is this possible? Sloan muttered, taking photographs. These systems require active monitoring. Someone had to input these values. Or something's feeding them false data, Quinn suggested. She connected a diagnostic cable to one of the control panels and pulled up the system logs on her laptop. Her eyes widened. Oh my God, what? Hale asked. The logs show continuous operation, daily, multiple shifts. The last entry was... She checked the timestamp. 43 minutes ago, someone logged a temperature adjustment on Furnace 2. We all stared at the cold, dark furnace. That's impossible, Knox said, but the logs didn't lie. According to the system, Hermitage Steel Plant had been operating at full capacity for the past 4 months, producing steel, running shifts, maintaining equipment, despite being abandoned for 5 years. And then the voices started. They were faint at first, distant. But they grew louder, converging on our position. I heard footsteps on the catwalks above, metal clanging against metal. And voices, clear, distinct, immediate. Who's on the floor? Is that maintenance? No, I think it's corporate. Inspectors, maybe. Shit. Everyone, stay sharp. Don't want them seeing anything out of spec. Hale drew his weapon. Show yourself, FBI. The voices stopped. The footsteps ceased. Silence fell over the production floor, heavy and absolute. Spread out, Hale ordered. Find the source. There has to be someone here. We split up, each of us taking a section of the floor. I moved along the eastern wall, checking behind equipment, scanning the shadows with my flashlight. Nothing. No one. Just rust and decay. Agent Briggs. I spun around. The voice was right behind me, close enough that I should have felt breath on my neck. But there was no one there. Agent Briggs, you shouldn't be here. It was a man's voice, calm and matter-of-fact. I aimed my flashlight in the direction of the sound, but the beam illuminated only empty air. Who are you? I demanded. Someone who understands what this place is, what it needs. Show yourself. I can't. None of us can. We're not here. Not the way you are. My skin prickled. What does that mean? It means you need to leave. Now. Before you become part of it. Part of what? But the voice didn't answer. Instead, the machinery around me began to hum. The furnaces ignited with a roar, flames erupting from their mouths, heat washing over me in a wave. The conveyor belts started moving, their metal surfaces grinding and shrieking. And above, on the catwalks, I saw figures. Dozens of them. wearing hard hats and safety goggles, moving with purpose, working invisible controls. I stumbled backward, my pulse racing. This wasn't possible. None of this was real, but the heat was real, the sound was real, the figures above me were real. "Briggs!" Hale's voice cut through the chaos. "Fall back. Everyone out." I ran, we all ran, converging on the exit, the sounds of the factory roaring behind us. The voices shouted after us, desperate, pleading. "Don't go. We need you. We can't stop." We burst out into the daylight, gasping, shaking. Behind us, the plant stood silent once more, the sounds cutting off as if they'd never been. Hale leaned against his car, his face pale. What the hell was that? "I don't know," I said. "But we need answers, now." We regrouped at the motel, spreading out our evidence across 2 adjoining rooms. Quinn analyzed the electromagnetic data, looking for patterns. Sloan reviewed his photographs, comparing them to the blueprints. Knox researched the plant's history, pulling up newspaper archives and bankruptcy filings, and Hale and I tried to make sense of what we'd just experienced. Could it be mass hallucination? Hale suggested. Some kind of airborne toxin? Old factories can have all kinds of chemical residue. We'd need exposure over time, Quinn said without looking up from her laptop. And it wouldn't explain the electrical activity. That's measurable, objective. The circuits are really on. Then who's turning them on? Hale asked. No one had an answer. Knox spoke up from the corner, where she'd been scrolling through old news articles on her laptop. "I found something, an incident from 991, just before the plant closed." "What kind of incident?" I asked. "An explosion in one of the furnaces. Killed 12 workers, injured 20 more. According to the reports, it was a catastrophic failure. Improper maintenance, cost-cutting measures, ignored safety protocols. The company tried to cover it up, but OSHA launched an investigation. That's what triggered the bankruptcy. 12 workers, Sloan repeated. All killed at once. And the plant closed a month later, Knox continued. The bodies were recovered, funerals were held, but there was a lot of anger in the community. Families sued, workers picketed. Some people said the company abandoned the dead, that they rushed the cleanup and demolition to avoid further liability. I felt a chill. When did the power consumption start? Quinn checked her notes. December 95, 4 years after the explosion. 4 years, I said. That's how long it would take for the bankruptcy proceedings to settle, for the legal battles to die down, for people to move on. Hale stood up. "You're saying what? That the ghosts of dead workers are running the plant?" "I'm saying we need to find out what happened to those 12 workers, where they're buried, if there was anything unusual about the aftermath." Knox was already typing. "Give me a minute." We waited in tense silence while she searched. Finally, she looked up, her expression troubled. "There's a problem. According to the records, only 11 bodies were recovered." "What happened to the 12th?" Hale asked. "Unknown. The reports say the remains were too badly damaged to identify. The family held a memorial service with an empty casket, but there was never a burial. The body was..." She scrolled down. "It was supposed to be in the county medical examiner's custody, pending identification through dental records. But there's no follow-up, no confirmation that it was ever claimed." "Where's the ME's office?" I asked. "Mercer County Courthouse, downtown Hermitage." "Let's go." The Mercer County medical examiner was a woman named Dr. Patricia Rourke, a no-nonsense professional in her 60s who'd held the position since 1989. She met us in her office, a cramped space lined with filing cabinets and anatomical charts. "I remember the Hermitage steel explosion," she said when we explained our visit. Worst industrial accident I've ever had to process. 12 victims, most of them burned beyond recognition. We used dental records, fingerprints, anything we could to identify them. The records say only 11 were identified, I said. What happened to the 12th? Dr. Rourke's expression darkened. That's complicated. We had 12 bodies initially, but when we went to match the dental records for the last victim, a man named Victor Dane, we couldn't make an identification. The teeth didn't match. Neither did the bone structure. So it wasn't Victor Dane. No, it was him. We confirmed it later through DNA, but the body we had in the morgue, it wasn't his, or rather it was, but it also wasn't. I don't know how else to explain it. Try, Hale said. Dr. Rourke sighed. The body was wrong, anatomically wrong. The bones were fused in places they shouldn't be. The organs, what was left of them, were in the wrong positions. And there was metal. Not shrapnel from the explosion, but metal that had somehow integrated into the tissue, like the body had been part of the machinery. The room went silent. What did you do with it? I asked. I filed a report with the state medical board. They sent a specialist to examine it. He took samples, ran tests, and then sealed the case. Told me to cremate the remains and not to discuss it with anyone. So that's what I did. Do you have the report? It was classified, taken by the specialist when he left, but I kept copies of the x-rays. She pulled open a filing cabinet and retrieved a large envelope. I probably shouldn't show you these, but given that you're federal agents, she spread the x-rays across her desk. I leaned in, studying the images, and felt my stomach turn. The skeleton was human, but twisted. The ribs had grown together, forming a cage that wrapped around the spine. The bones of the arms and legs showed signs of metal infusion, thin lines of foreign material running through the marrow. And in the chest cavity, where the heart should have been, was a mass of metal and organic tissue fused together in a shape that looked almost mechanical. "What is this?" Knox whispered. "I don't know," Dr. Rourke said. "But it's the reason I've had nightmares for 5 years." We left the ME's office in silence. The x-rays copied and added to our evidence file. Back at the motel, we spread them out again, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. "The factory did something to him," Quinn said, "to Victor Dane. It changed him, integrated him into the machinery. Or he integrated himself," Sloan suggested. "What if he didn't die in the explosion? What if he survived but was so badly injured that he merged with the systems?" "That's insane," Hale said. "Is it? We've seen the voices, the figures, the electrical activity. What if they're not ghosts? What if they're imprints, recordings somehow embedded in the machinery? And what if Victor Dane is the source?" I thought about the voice I'd heard. "You need to leave, before you become part of it." "We need to go back," I said, "tonight, and we need to find Victor Dane." We returned to the plant at 2100 hours. 6 of us this time, the original team plus Deputy Teague, who'd insisted on coming despite his obvious fear. We brought more equipment, additional lights, recording devices, a portable generator, and enough batteries to keep everything running for hours. If we were going to capture evidence of what was happening here, we needed to be prepared. The chain-link gate stood open. We hadn't left it that way. "Someone's been here," Teague said, his hand moving to his sidearm. "Or something," Quinn muttered. We approached cautiously, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The plant looked different at night, more alive somehow. The windows on the upper floors glowed with that same sickly yellow light, and I could hear the distant hum of machinery even from the parking lot. Inside, the transformation was complete. The ground floor was no longer dark and abandoned. Lights blazed from overhead fixtures. The machinery that had been silent and rusted now gleamed, cleaned, and functional. And everywhere I saw movement. Figures in work clothes operating controls, checking gauges, moving between stations with practiced efficiency. But when I looked directly at them, they flickered. Like images on a failing television, their forms stuttering between solid and translucent. "Jesus Christ," Teague breathed. "They're really here." The workers seemed aware of us, but unconcerned. They went about their tasks, calling out to one another, adjusting equipment. One man walked right past me, so close I could have reached out and touched him. He was middle-aged, with a thick mustache and scarred hands. He glanced at me briefly, his eyes sad, and then continued on. "They're not hostile," Knox observed. "They're just working." "Production floor Alpha," Hale said. "Let's go." We made our way through the plant, following the same route as before. The workers parted around us, creating a path but never quite acknowledging our presence. The air smelled of hot metal and burning coal, despite the cold furnaces, and the sound was overwhelming. The clang of hammers, the hiss of hydraulics, the roar of flames. A symphony of industry that shouldn't exist. The production floor was fully operational. The furnaces burned with white-hot intensity, their mouths open and hungry. Molten steel flowed along channels, glowing orange and red. The conveyor belts moved in smooth coordination, carrying ingots and billets to the next station. It was a perfectly functioning factory, frozen in 1991, and yet somehow still running. And in the center of it all, standing before the main control panel, was a man. He was tall, thin, dressed in the remnants of a foreman's uniform. But there was something wrong with him. His skin had a metallic sheen, like polished steel. His eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the light of the furnaces. And when he moved, I heard the sound of gears clicking, servos whirring. He was part human, part machine. Integrated. "Victor Dane," I said. The man turned to face me. His expression was tired, worn. "You know my name. We've been looking for you, trying to understand what happened here." "What happened?" He laughed, a hollow sound. "I died. We all died. 12 of us, burned alive when that furnace exploded. The company cut corners, ignored safety regulations, and we paid the price. But I didn't want to go. Not like that. Not for nothing." "So you stayed," Quinn said softly. "I didn't have a choice. When you die in a place like this, when your blood soaks into the machinery, when your last breath is ash and fire, you become part of it. The factory claimed me, claimed all of us. And we've been here ever since, running the shifts, maintaining the systems, because that's what we know. That's all we have left." "But the plant is closed," Knox said. "It's been closed for 5 years. Not to us. To us, it never stopped. Every night we come back. We clock in, we work our stations, we produce, and every night we die again when the shift ends. Over and over, forever." I felt a wave of horror wash over me. "You're trapped here. We're bound here," Victor corrected. "By our deaths, by our rage, by the company that killed us and then forgot we existed. And as long as the machinery has power, we'll keep working. We don't have a choice." "Then we'll cut the power," Hale said. "Shut down the electrical system." Victor's eyes flared. "No, you can't. If the power stops, we stop. And if we stop—" "What?" I asked. "What happens if you stop?" "We go into the dark, and we don't want to go into the dark." Behind him, the other workers had stopped their tasks. They stood motionless, watching us. Waiting, their faces were desperate, pleading. They didn't want to stop. They couldn't. "There has to be another way," Knox said. "Some way to release you." "There isn't," Victor said. "We tried. God, we tried. But the factory won't let us go. It needs us. It feeds on us. And now, he looked past us toward the entrance. Now it wants you. I followed his gaze. The doors had closed. The lights flickered. And from the shadows at the edges of the production floor, I saw new figures emerging. Not workers. Something else. Shapes made of metal and shadow with eyes that glowed like furnace fire. "Run," Victor said. "Run and don't come back." The shapes moved toward us, fast and silent. We ran, scattering in different directions. I heard Teague shouting, saw Sloan stumble and fall. Hale fired his weapon, the shots echoing through the vast space, but the bullets passed through the shapes without effect. I ran for the staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time. Behind me I heard screaming, one of the team. I couldn't tell who. The shapes were hurting us, driving us deeper into the plant, separating us. I reached the 3rd floor and ducked into a hallway, pressing myself against the wall. My radio crackled to life, filled with static and fragmented voices. "Under attack. Can't find the exit. It's pulling me in." I keyed my mic. "This is Briggs. Everyone converge on the electrical room. We're cutting the power. That's an order." I didn't wait for a response. I ran through the hallways, navigating by memory and instinct. The plant seemed to shift around me, hallways extending, doors appearing where they hadn't been before. But I kept moving, kept pushing forward. I found the electrical room and burst through the door. Quinn was already there, her hands on the main breaker. Hale and Knox arrived seconds later, both breathing hard. "Where are the others?" I asked. "I don't know," Hale said. "Teague was behind me, but I lost him, and Sloan, we'll find them," I said. "After we shut this down." "Quinn?" She looked at me, her face pale. "If I do this, we're condemning them, Victor and the others. They'll disappear. They're already gone. This isn't life. It's a loop, a prison. We're setting them free." She nodded and gripped the breaker. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. She pulled. The effect was immediate. The lights went out, plunging us into darkness. The hum of machinery died, replaced by an eerie silence. And then, from somewhere deep in the plant, I heard a sound like 1,000 voices screaming in unison. A wave of anger and despair that shook the walls, rattled the windows, made the floor beneath us vibrate. And then, nothing. We stood in the darkness, our flashlights the only source of light. The plant was dead, truly dead, for the first time in months. "Let's find the others and get out of here," Hale said. We found Teague on the 2nd floor, sitting against a wall, his face blank. He didn't respond when we called his name, just stared into space, his eyes unfocused. We had to carry him out. Sloan was worse. We found him on the production floor, lying beside one of the cold furnaces. His body was unmarked, no injuries, no signs of trauma. But he was dead. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. And when Dr. Rourke performed the autopsy 3 days later, she found metal fragments in his tissue, just like Victor Dane. Knox never spoke again. She walked out of that plant under her own power, got in her car, and drove back to Pittsburgh. But something had broken inside her. She requested a transfer to a desk job and refused to discuss what had happened. The Bureau granted her request without question. As for me, I wrote my report. I documented everything: the voices, the workers, the electrical anomalies, Victor Dane's confession. I included the x-rays, the electrical logs, the witness statements. And then I submitted it to my superiors and waited. The response came a week later. A single page, stamped, classified. No further action required. The plant was demolished in May 1996. A controlled implosion, carried out by a private contractor under federal supervision. The machinery was scrapped, the materials hauled away. The land was sold to a development company that planned to build a shopping center. But the power consumption didn't stop. According to PUC records, the electrical draw continued for 6 more months after the demolition. 200,000 kilowatt hours per month, pulled from a facility that no longer existed. And then, in November 1996, it finally stopped. No one knows why. I left the FBI in '98. Not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't do the work anymore. Every case I touched felt hollow, meaningless. How could I investigate bank fraud or organized crime when I knew there were things in the world that defied explanation? Things that couldn't be fought with evidence and testimony. The Hermitage case stayed with me. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, hearing the voices, seeing Victor Dane's metallic eyes. I'd drive past factories and feel my skin crawl, wondering if anyone was trapped inside, working invisible shifts, dying over and over. In 2003, I received a letter. No return address, no signature. Just a single sheet of paper with a few lines of text. The factory is gone, but we're still here. In the steel. In the machines. In every piece that was salvaged and sold. We go where the metal goes. And we're waiting. Thank you for trying. VD. I burned the letter immediately, but the message stayed with me. I started researching, digging into records of the demolition and the disposal of the plant's materials. Most of it had been sold as scrap to recycling facilities across the Midwest. Melted down, reformed, incorporated into new products. Steel beams, car frames, appliances. The factory had been distributed across the country, its molecules scattered and repurposed. And wherever that steel went, strange things followed. In 2004, a high-rise in Cleveland reported unexplained electrical surges. Workers on the night shift claimed to hear voices in the walls, see figures moving through empty floors. The building's steel frame had been constructed using recycled materials from Pennsylvania. In 2006, an auto plant in Detroit shut down after multiple workers reported seeing apparitions on the assembly line. Men in outdated work clothes, operating machinery that didn't exist. The plant had recently upgraded its equipment, including hydraulic presses made from reclaimed steel. The pattern repeated itself. Factories, construction sites, industrial facilities, all experiencing the same phenomena. Voices, figures, electrical anomalies. And in each case, when I traced the materials back, they led to Hermitage. I tried to warn people, contacted the FBI, OSHA, even the EPA, but no one would listen. The cases were written off as worker stress, faulty wiring, mass hysteria, and I couldn't prove otherwise. I didn't have evidence, just a theory built on impossible events and a letter from a dead man. In 2011, I stopped trying. What was the point? The steel was out there, the workers were out there, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. But I keep track. I monitor reports, follow up on anomalies, document every incident. Because I made a promise to Victor Dane and the others. I would remember them. I would bear witness to what happened. And I would make sure that even if the world forgot, someone knew the truth. Last month, I received another letter. Different handwriting this time, but the same lack of return address. Agent Briggs, you tried to save us. Thank you for that. But you need to understand, we don't want to be saved anymore. This is what we are now. This is what we've become. The factory never really closed. It just spread. Every piece of steel carries a piece of us. Every factory built with our metal inherits our curse. And every worker who dies in those places joins us. We're growing. The shift never ends. And someday, everywhere will be part of the plant. Don't come looking for us. Don't try to stop it. Just remember. The night shift. I don't know how many of them there are now. Dozens? Hundreds? The original 12 have been joined by others. Workers who died in accidents, suicides in industrial facilities, anyone who bled out on factory floors. They all become part of it, absorbed into the metal, trapped in the machinery. And they're still working. I think about Sloan sometimes, about the metal fragments Dr. Rourke found in his tissue, about the way he died without a mark on him. And I wonder if he's one of them now, if somewhere, in some factory floor, Marcus Sloan is clocking in for the night shift. I wonder if he even knows he's dead. The Hermitage. Steel plant investigation was officially closed in April 1996. The file is sealed, classified at a level I no longer have clearance to access. The witnesses have been silenced, some by choice, others by force. Deputy Teague never recovered. He lives in a care facility now, staring at walls, occasionally whispering about the workers and the shift that never ends. Lawson Hale retired in 2000. We spoke once after that, over drinks at a bar in Pittsburgh. He told me he'd tried to forget, tried to move on. But he still heard the voices sometimes, late at night. And he'd started avoiding factories, steel mills, any industrial site. Just in case. Harper Quinn transferred to cybercrime. Said she never wanted to see another factory again. I heard she does good work now, tracking digital threats, stopping hackers, but I also heard she won't use appliances made after 2004. Won't drive cars built with recycled steel. She knows what's in the metal. Avery Knox left the bureau entirely. Last I heard, she was working as a librarian in Vermont, far from any industrial centers. She sent me a card once, years ago. It said, some things should stay buried. She was right. But they didn't stay buried. They never do. Because that's the thing about steel. It doesn't decay. It doesn't disappear. It just gets recycled, reformed, repurposed. And everything that was trapped inside gets carried along with it. The Hermitage steel plant is gone. But the night shift continues. In Cleveland and Detroit. In Gary, Indiana, and Birmingham, Alabama. In every city with a factory, every town with a mill. The workers are there, trapped in the metal, bound to the machinery, running shifts that never end. And they're waiting. Waiting for more workers to join them. More blood to soak into the steel. More voices to add to the chorus. I'm 61 years old now. I live in a small town in Montana, far from any industrial centers. I don't own any appliances made after 1996. I don't drive a car built with modern steel. I've stripped my life down to the essentials, using only materials I can verify, sources I can trust. Because I know what's in the metal. I know what's waiting. And I know that someday, if I'm not careful, I might hear my own voice echoing in a factory somewhere, calling out production numbers, checking temperatures, working a shift that will never end. 3 weeks ago, I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of machinery. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable. The clang of metal on metal, the hiss of hydraulics, the low rumble of furnaces. I got up and walked through my house trying to find the source, but it wasn't coming from outside, it was coming from inside the walls. I have steel beams in my house. The contractor said they were necessary for structural integrity. He said they were high quality, American-made, recycled from old industrial sites. He said they'd last forever. I'm starting to hear voices in the walls now. Faint, but growing louder. Orders being called out. Reports being given. The sound of a factory in operation. Last night I saw a figure in my hallway. A man in work clothes, his skin gleaming like polished steel. He looked at me with sad, tired eyes, and then he turned and walked through the wall. I think the factory has found me. I think I'm being claimed. My name is Archer Sloan. I've been with the FBI for 11 years, stationed primarily in the Pittsburgh field office. My background is in missing persons cases, cold cases mostly, the ones where someone vanished without explanation, leaving behind questions that eat at families for decades. I've learned to live with ambiguity, with cases that never quite close, but nothing prepared me for what we found beneath Kinswa Lake. It started with a drought. The summer of 1998 was the driest Pennsylvania had seen in 40 years. Reservoirs dropped to record lows, rivers became streams, and lakes receded to reveal things that hadn't seen daylight in decades. Kinswa Lake, the massive reservoir created by the Allegheny Dam in 1965, shrank to 60% of its normal capacity. And as the water withdrew, something emerged. The call came from the Army Corps of Engineers on June 22nd. A surveyor named Martin Cruz had been documenting the exposed lakebed when he discovered structures, buildings, foundations, streets. This wasn't unusual. Everyone knew that several small communities had been flooded when the dam was built, their residents relocated under eminent domain. But these structures didn't match any of the known settlements. They weren't on the maps. They weren't in the historical records. They shouldn't exist. I drove up to Warren County on June 24th. The landscape was stunning. Dense forests covering steep hills, the Allegheny River cutting through valleys, and the lake itself now reduced to a shadow of its former size. The exposed lake bed was a surreal moonscape of cracked mud and scattered debris, tree stumps, rusted equipment, the skeletal remains of flooded forests. Martin Cruz met me at the Corps of Engineers field office, a temporary structure near the dam. He was in his mid-50s, weathered and practical, not the type to jump at shadows. But when he spread the survey photos across the table, his hands were shaking. "I've been doing this work for 23 years, he said. "I've surveyed dozens of reservoirs. I know what drowned towns look like. But this," he tapped one of the photos, "this is different." The image showed a town square, intact, buildings with walls still standing, windows empty but frames preserved, a church steeple rising from the mud, streets laid out in a grid pattern, and in the center a fountain, dry but complete, with something carved into its base. "Where is this?" I asked. "About 3 miles southeast of the main dam, in what used to be the eastern arm of the lake. The water's down far enough that you can walk right into it. But Agent Sloan," he looked at me directly, "this town isn't on any of our records. When the Corps flooded the valley in 1965, we relocated 6 communities. We have documentation for every building, every family, every acre. But this place, it doesn't exist in our files." Could it have been missed during the initial surveys? No, the Corps was meticulous. We had to be. There were legal challenges, protests, people fighting the dam. We documented everything. If a town this size had been here, we would have known about it. I studied the photographs. The architecture looked right for the 1950s or early 60s. Simple, functional buildings, typical of rural Pennsylvania. But the preservation was remarkable. Usually, 30 years underwater destroys everything. Wood rots, brick crumbles, metal corrodes. But these structures looked almost maintained. "I need to see it," I said. We drove out to the access point that afternoon, following dirt roads that wound through the receding shoreline. The exposed mud was gray and cracked, littered with the detritus of decades: bottles, cans, fishing gear, the occasional tire. The air smelled of stagnant water and decay, and then I saw it, rising from the mud like a memory. The town was real. Not ruins, not foundations, actual buildings standing upright, their walls intact. I counted at least 20 structures arranged around a central square. The church dominated the skyline, its white paint peeling but the structure sound. Next to it, a general store with faded lettering still visible. Harmon's Goods and Supplies, a post office, a diner, houses with front porches and yards, now filled with dried mud. Jesus, I muttered. Cruz led me into the square. Our boots squelched in the wet mud, and the silence was oppressive. No birds, no wind, just the distant hum of the dam's turbines. As we walked, I noticed details. Mailboxes still standing beside doors. A swing set in one yard, chains rusted but the seats intact. A bicycle leaning against a fence. It's like they just left, Cruz said. No signs of hurried evacuation, no vandalism. Everything's in place. We approached the fountain in the center of the square. It was circular, made of stone, with a statue in the middle. A woman holding a pitcher, water frozen in mid-pour. Carved into the base was a name, Eden Hollow, Astede. 1889. I pulled out my notepad and wrote it down. Eden Hollow, does that mean anything to you? Cruz shook his head. I've never heard of it, and I've studied every community in this valley. We walked to the nearest building, the general store. The door was unlocked. Inside, the shelves were still stocked. Canned goods, their labels faded but legible. Boxes of soap powder, glass bottles of soda, a cash register sat on the counter, its drawer slightly open, revealing coins and bills. I picked up one of the bills, $1, dated 1964. This doesn't make sense, I said. If the town was flooded in 1965, why is everything still here? Why wasn't it looted or cleared out? That's what I've been trying to figure out, Cruz said. But there's something else, come on. He led me to the church. The front doors stood open, revealing an interior filled with mud-stained pews. Hymnals sat in the racks, Bibles on the altar. And on the walls, photographs, dozens of them, framed portraits of families, individuals, groups, all smiling, all frozen in time. I approached one of the photos, a family of 4, mother, father, 2 children. The father wore a suit, the mother a floral dress. The children looked young, maybe 5 and 7. They stood in front of this very church, the summer sun bright behind them. Do you recognize any of them? I asked Cruz. No, and I checked the Corps' relocation records. None of these faces appear in the documentation. It's like these people never existed. I photographed the portraits, making sure to capture every detail. Then I noticed something strange. Every photo had the same date scrawled in the corner. June 1965. June 1965, I said. That's when the dam was completed, when the flooding began. Right. So why would they be taking family photos if they knew their town was about to be underwater? I didn't have an answer. We spent the next 2 hours exploring the town. Every building was the same, fully furnished, stocked, preserved, kitchens with dishes in the cabinets, bedrooms with clothes in the closets, a schoolhouse with textbooks on the desks and chalk still sitting on the tray. It was as if everyone had simply walked away, leaving everything behind. But the most disturbing discovery came in the post office. Cruz and I entered through the back door, finding a sorting room with cubbies full of mail. I picked up a letter at random. It was addressed to Mrs. Eleanor Vance, 14 Maple Street, Eden Hollow, PA. The return address was from Harrisburg. I opened it carefully. The letter was dated June 10, 1965. It read, Dear Eleanor, we received your inquiry about the relocation assistance. Unfortunately, Eden Hollow is not listed in our records as a community affected by the Kinsua Dam project. We have no documentation of your town's existence, and therefore cannot provide compensation or relocation support. If you believe this is an error, please contact our office with property deeds, census records, or other proof of residence. Sincerely, Pennsylvania Department of Community Affairs. I read it twice, then showed it to Cruz. His face went pale. They were trying to prove their town existed, he said. They were fighting to be recognized. But they failed, I said. No one believed them. We searched through more letters. They were all similar: pleas for help, requests for relocation assistance, desperate attempts to prove that Eden Hollow was real. And every response was the same: no records found, cannot assist. How is this possible? Cruz asked. How does an entire town get erased from the maps? I didn't know, but I intended to find out. Back at the field office, I called the Pittsburgh Bureau and requested a full investigative team. I also contacted the Pennsylvania State Archives, the Warren County Historical Society, and the Army Corps of Engineers headquarters in Washington. I needed documentation: maps, census records, land deeds, anything that could explain Eden Hollow's existence. The responses came back over the next 2 days, and they were all the same: no records found. The State Archives had no census data for Eden Hollow. The County Historical Society had no photographs, no newspaper articles, no mention of the town in any local histories. The Corps of Engineers confirmed that their 1960s survey showed no settlement at that location, just empty forest and farmland. It was as if Eden Hollow had been erased. Not just forgotten, but actively removed from history. The investigative team arrived on June 27th. 3 agents from Pittsburgh, Wyatt Brennan, a veteran investigator with expertise in archival research, Jude Monroe, a forensic specialist, and Avery Holt, a junior agent with a background in cartography. We met at the Corps field office and reviewed everything I'd found. "This is unprecedented," Brennan said, studying the photographs. "A town this size doesn't just disappear from the records. Someone would have to deliberately remove every reference, every document, every piece of evidence." "But why?" Monroe asked. "What's the motive?" "That's what we're here to find out," I said. "We're going back to Eden Hollow. Full documentation this time: photographs, samples, measurements. I want every building cataloged, every piece of mail examined. If there's an explanation for this, we'll find it." We loaded the vehicles with equipment and drove out to the site. The day was hot, the sun beating down on the exposed lake bed. As we approached the town, I felt a strange sensation, a pressure in my chest, like the air was thicker here. The others felt it too. Monroe mentioned a headache. Holt said her watch had stopped. We entered Eden Hollow, and I immediately noticed something new. The buildings looked different. Not physically, they were the same structures I'd seen before, but they felt occupied, like someone was watching us from the windows, even though I could see they were empty. "Let's split up," I said. "Brennan, you take the church and the post office. Monroe, check the residential buildings. Holt, you're with me. We'll document the town square and the commercial district." We spread out, moving through the town with methodical precision. Holt photographed everything while I took notes, measuring dimensions, recording details. The silence was absolute, broken only by the click of cameras and the scratch of pencils on paper. After about an hour, Monroe radioed in. "Agent Sloan, you need to see this." We found him at a house on the eastern edge of town. He stood on the front porch, his expression troubled. "Look at the mailbox." I walked over. The mailbox read, "The Monroe family, 8 Elm Street." "Your name," I said. "Yeah, and it's not a coincidence. Come inside." We entered the house. The interior was modest but well kept. A living room with a couch and armchairs, a kitchen with a table set for 4, bedrooms upstairs. And on the mantel above the fireplace, a family photograph. It showed 4 people. A man who looked remarkably like Jude Monroe. a woman with his eyes, and 2 children, both with his features, his build. "That's not me," Monroe said, his voice tight. "But it could be. That man looks exactly like my grandfather." I examined the photo closely. The resemblance was uncanny. "What was your grandfather's name?" "Robert Monroe. He died in 1972, but he never mentioned living in a place called Eden Hollow." "Are you sure?" Monroe hesitated. "Actually, my family never talked about where he came from. I just assumed it was somewhere in Pennsylvania, but no one ever specified. And when I tried to ask once, my grandmother got upset, told me to drop it." A chill ran through me. "We need to check the other houses, see if there are more connections." We did, and we found them. At 14 Maple Street, Brennan discovered a photograph of a woman named Eleanor Vance, and she was the spitting image of his mother. At 22 Oak Avenue, Holt found a family portrait that included a young girl who could have been her twin. Every agent had a connection to Eden Hollow, every single one of us. But it went deeper than just physical resemblance. As we searched through the houses, we found personal items that seemed impossibly familiar. In the Monroe house, Jude discovered a pocket watch in a bedroom drawer, the exact same model his grandfather had owned, down to the inscription on the back, "Time waits for no man." In Eleanor Vance's house, Brennan found a recipe book with handwritten notes and margins, and the handwriting was identical to his mother's. "This is impossible," Holt said, holding up a child's drawing she'd found. It showed a house with a red door and a maple tree in the yard, the exact house she'd grown up in, 200 miles away. "I drew this picture when I was 6 years old. My mother kept it on the refrigerator for years. How is it here? Maybe it's not the same drawing," I suggested, though I didn't believe it myself. "It has my name on it," she said, turning it over. And there it was, in a child's handwriting. Avery, age 6. We gathered in the town square, each of us carrying items we'd found. Photographs, letters, personal effects that connected us to Eden Hollow in ways that defied explanation. The implications were staggering. Either our families had originated from this town and somehow we'd been brought back here, or something about Eden Hollow itself was creating these connections, pulling us in through our own histories. "What if Protocol 17 wasn't just about erasing the town?" Brennan said slowly. "What if it was about erasing people, specific people? And what if we're descendants of those people? That would mean our grandparents, our great-grandparents, they all came from here," Monroe said. "But none of us knew about Eden Hollow before this investigation." "Because the erasure was complete," I said. "They didn't just remove the town from maps. They removed it from family histories, from memories. Made it so the descendants would never know where they came from." "But why?" Holt asked. "Why go to such lengths?" Before anyone could answer, we heard footsteps behind us. We turned to see a man standing at the edge of the square. He was elderly, perhaps 70, wearing overalls and a flannel shirt. But he was solid, real, not translucent like the other figures we'd seen. "Because we knew things," the man said, his voice rough with age and bitterness. "Things the government didn't want anyone to know." I approached him slowly, my hand near my weapon. "Who are you?" "Name's Thomas Harmon. I owned the general store." He gestured toward the building we'd explored earlier. "I was 23 when they flooded the valley. I'm one of the 47. "That's impossible," Monroe said. "You'd be over 90 years old." "I am over 90, Harmon said. "But I'm not alive. Not really. I'm what's left. An echo. A recording trapped in this place playing over and over since the day I drowned." We stood in stunned silence. Harmon looked around the square, his expression filled with sorrow. Eden Hollow wasn't just any town, he continued. We were different. Our families had lived here for generations, going back before Pennsylvania was even a state. And we'd kept records, oral histories, knowledge passed down through the bloodlines. Knowledge of what? I asked. Of places like this, places where the world is thin, where time doesn't flow quite right, where the barrier between what is and what was becomes permeable. Our ancestors built Eden Hollow here deliberately, to guard this place, to keep others away. Guard it from what? Harmon smiled sadly. From being exploited, from being used. Because when you build something on a thin place, a dam, a factory, anything that tears into the earth, you create a wound, and wounds have consequences. He walked to the fountain and placed his hand on its edge. When they announced the dam project, we tried to stop it, told them what would happen if they flooded this valley, but they didn't listen. Called us superstitious, backwards, ignorant country folk trying to block progress. So they erased you, Brennan said. They erased us, removed us from the records so we had no legal standing to fight back. And when we refused to leave, when we said we'd rather drown than abandon our duty, they let us. Filled the reservoir and watched us die. But you're still here, Monroe said. Still guarding. We can't stop. Even in death, the duty remains. And now the town itself has become part of the guardianship. Anyone who tries to remember Eden Hollow, who tries to acknowledge what happened here, gets drawn in, becomes part of the eternal watch. I felt a chill run through me. That's what happened to us. We were brought here. You were called here, Harmon corrected, because you have the blood. Because somewhere in your lineages, you're connected to the families of Eden Hollow, and the town recognized you, drew you back. Can we leave? Holt asked, her voice somewhere. Harmon looked at her with pity. You can walk away, but you'll never truly leave. Part of you will always be here, tied to this place, and when you die, you'll come back. Join us in the eternal guardianship. The bell in the church tower began to ring, slow and mournful. Harmon turned toward the sound. My time is almost up. The echo is fading. But remember what I told you. This place exists for a reason. The government tried to destroy it, but they only made it stronger. Gave it 47 more guardians, 47 more voices calling out warnings. He started to fade, becoming translucent. Don't try to expose what happened here. Don't try to bring justice for us. That's not what we need. We need you to remember, to carry the knowledge, to make sure no one builds on thin places ever again. Wait, I called out. How do we know where the thin places are? But Harmon was gone, dissolved into the afternoon air. We stood alone in the square, the bell still ringing, each of us processing what we'd learned. We need to document this, I said finally. Every word, every detail. But even as I said it, I knew it was futile. No one would believe us. And even if they did, the forces that had erased Eden Hollow once would erase it again. This isn't possible, Holt whispered. We were randomly assigned to this case. There's no way. It's not random, I interrupted. Someone wanted us here, someone who knew about our family connections. But how? Brennan demanded. How does a town that doesn't exist in any record somehow connect to all of us? Before anyone could answer, we heard it. A sound from the center of town. A bell ringing slowly, methodically. We rushed to the square and found the church bell swinging in the steeple, pulled by an invisible hand, and then we heard the voices. They started as whispers, barely audible, but they grew louder, overlapping, multiplying. Men, women, children, all speaking at once. Some were calling names, Others were repeating phrases, "Remember us," "Don't forget," "We were here." The voices surrounded us, coming from every building, every street, and as they grew in volume, the town began to change. The colors intensified, the peeling paint looked fresh, the rusted metal gleamed. Lights flickered on in windows. Smoke rose from chimneys. The fountain in the square started flowing, water pouring from the statue's pitcher. Eden Hollow was coming back to life. "Fall back," I ordered. "Everyone to the vehicles, now." We ran, but as we fled, I looked back and saw them. Figures in the windows, standing on porches, walking through the streets. Men in work clothes, women in dresses, children playing in yards. They looked solid, real, and they were all watching us leave. We didn't stop until we reached the vehicles. Monroe's hands were shaking so badly he could barely open the door. Holt was crying. Brennan kept muttering, "This can't be real. This can't be real." But it was real. We'd all seen it. Back at the field office, we tried to make sense of what had happened. The logical part of my brain insisted there had to be an explanation. Mass hallucination, environmental factors, something in the water. But I knew better. I'd seen the photographs, the letters, the town itself. Eden Hollow was real, and it was trying to tell us something. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the voices, the figures, the way the town had transformed before our eyes, and I kept coming back to one question. Why us? Why had we been brought here? Around 200 hours, my phone rang. It was Monroe. "Agent Sloan," I called my mother, asked her about my grandfather's family, where they came from. And she said they lived in a small town near the Allegheny River, a place that was flooded in the 60s when they built the dam. She said the government forced them out, gave them almost nothing in compensation. My grandfather never got over it. He died bitter, angry that his home had been erased. Did she say the name of the town? A long pause. Then she said they weren't allowed to say the name, that the government had made it illegal, that anyone who tried to talk about it would be silenced. My blood ran cold. Silenced how? She didn't know. But she said my grandfather used to have nightmares. He'd wake up screaming about drowning, about water rising, about being forgotten. And he'd say the same thing every time. "We're still there, under the water, waiting." I thanked Monroe and hung up. Then I pulled out my case files and started going through them again, looking for any mention of government suppression, of towns deliberately removed from records. And I found something. A memo from 1964, classified until 1995, about communities of concern near the Kinzua Dam site. The memo referenced potential resistance and necessary measures to ensure project continuity. One line stood out: implementation of Protocol 17 authorized for non-compliant settlements. I had no idea what Protocol 17 was, but I was going to find out. I spent the next morning at the Pennsylvania State Archives in Harrisburg, searching for any reference to Protocol 17. The archives are massive. Miles of documents, decades of bureaucratic paper trails. But I've learned that if you know where to look, you can find anything. I started with Army Corps of Engineers records from the 1960s, specifically focusing on the Kinzua Dam project. The official documentation was sanitized. Environmental impact studies, engineering reports, relocation agreements. Nothing controversial. Nothing that would explain a missing town. But government agencies always create duplicates, backups, copies for different departments. And sometimes those copies end up in places they shouldn't. I found what I was looking for in a mislabeled box of Department of Interior correspondence from 1964. A folder marked Kinzua, Special Operations. Inside were photocopies of internal memos between federal officials. Most were routine: budget allocations, timeline adjustments, personnel assignments. But buried in the middle was a memo dated April 3, 1964, from someone named Edmund Cortez, Assistant Director of Regional Development. The subject line read, Protocol 17, Eden Hollow Implementation. I read it 3 times, my hands shaking. Following continued resistance from Eden Hollow residents to relocation orders and their refusal to accept federal compensation, Protocol 17 has been authorized. All documentation relating to the settlement will be removed from official records. Census data will be adjusted. Property deeds will be voided. The town will cease to exist in all federal, state, and county databases. Residents have been given final notice to evacuate. Those who refuse will be subject to prosecution under eminent domain statutes. However, given the town's remote location and minimal population, estimated 47 individuals, forced removal is deemed unnecessary. When the reservoir fills, the problem will resolve itself. All personnel are reminded that discussion of Eden Hollow is prohibited under national security protocols. Any inquiries about the settlement should be redirected to standard relocation channels. Protocol 17 will be considered successfully implemented upon completion of dam filling operations in June 1965. I sat back, processing what I just read. The government had deliberately erased Eden Hollow, not through violence or forced evacuation, but through bureaucratic annihilation. They'd simply deleted the town from existence, leaving its 47 residents with no legal standing, no way to prove they'd ever lived there. And then they'd flooded it. I photocopied the memo and drove back to Warren County. The team was waiting for me at the field office, and I briefed them on what I'd found. The reaction was exactly what I expected: shock, anger, disbelief. They killed those people, Monroe said, his voice flat. They knew the residents wouldn't leave, and they flooded the valley anyway. 47 people, Holt added, men, women, children, drowned because the government wanted them to disappear. And it worked, Brennan said. For 33 years, no one knew Eden Hollow existed until the drought exposed it. Which means the town we're seeing isn't just ruins, I said. It's evidence of a cover-up, a mass killing disguised as a relocation project. We need to bring this to the Bureau, Monroe said. Get a full investigation opened. This is federal-level conspiracy. I agree. But first, we need more evidence. The memo proves intent, but we need proof of what actually happened. Bodies, personal effects, something that confirms the residents were left to die. You want to go back, Holt said. It wasn't a question. We have to. This is the only chance we'll ever have. Once the water level rises again, Eden Hollow will be gone. We need to document everything before it's too late. We returned to the town that afternoon, this time with more equipment: underwater cameras, excavation tools, body bags. We didn't know what we'd find, but we needed to be prepared. The town looked different. The buildings were darker, their windows like hollow eyes. The fountain had stopped flowing, leaving the basin dry and cracked. And the air smelled wrong, not like mud and decay, but like something else, something old and stagnant, like breath exhaled too long ago. Stay together, I said. No one goes off alone. We document everything and get out before dark. We started with the church, figuring it was the most likely place for records. The interior was dim, lit only by the light filtering through broken windows. We searched the offices, the sacristy, the basement, and in a storage room behind the altar we found them. Records, handwritten ledgers documenting births, marriages, deaths, baptismal certificates, funeral notices, all for residents of Eden Hollow. I carefully photographed every page, preserving names and dates. Then I found the last entry. It was dated June 14th, 1965. A single line in shaky handwriting. "The water is rising. They're not coming for us. God have mercy." No signature. Just that final plea. Written as the town drowned. Sloan. Brennan's voice came from the basement. "You need to see this." I descended the narrow stairs, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The basement was flooded. Not with lake water, but with something else. A dark liquid that reflected the light like oil. And floating in it were shapes. Dozens of them. Photographs. Hundreds of photographs, face down in the water. I carefully picked one up and turned it over. It showed a family, the same family from the Monroe house. They were standing in front of the church, smiling. And written on the back in faded ink, "Last photo, June 13th, 1965. We won't be forgotten. We collected as many as we could, placing them in evidence bags. Each one showed residents of Eden Hollow, dated June 1965, the last days before the flood. They knew, Holt said quietly. They knew they were going to die, and they documented everything. They wanted proof. Proof that someone destroyed, Monroe added. Someone who implemented Protocol 17. We left the church and moved to the residential area. I wanted to search the houses, look for personal effects, anything that could identify the victims. But as we walked through the streets, I noticed something wrong. The houses were arranged differently. Streets that had been straight now curved. Buildings that had been on the left were now on the right. The town was rearranging itself. "Is anyone else seeing this?" Holt asked, her voice tight with fear. "I am," I said. "The town is changing." "How is that possible?" "I don't know. But we need to move faster." We entered the nearest house, number 22, the one with Holt's family photograph. The interior was exactly as we'd left it. But upstairs, in the bedroom, we found something new. A diary, sitting on the nightstand, open to the last page. I picked it up and read, June 14th, 1965. The water is at the door. We can hear it rising, pressing against the walls. Papa says we have to go upstairs, that maybe the second floor will be safe. But we all know it won't be. The dam is full. The valley is flooding. And we're still here. I don't understand why they did this to us. We're Americans. We pay taxes. We served in the wars. Why doesn't anyone care that we're dying? Mama says God is watching, that he sees what's being done, but I don't think God is watching. I think he's turned away. If anyone finds this, please remember us. Please tell the world that Eden Hollow existed, that we existed. We were here. The entry ended there. I carefully photographed each page, then placed the diary in an evidence bag. My hands were shaking. The weight of what we'd uncovered was overwhelming. Not just a cover-up, but a deliberate act of negligent homicide. 47 people, left to drown because acknowledging their existence was inconvenient. "We have enough," Brennan said. "We should go." But Monroe was staring at something across the street. "Look," I followed his gaze. In the town square, figures were appearing. Translucent at first, like heat shimmer, but growing more solid. Men, women, children, all wearing clothes from the 1960s, all standing perfectly still, watching us. "They're here," Holt whispered. "The residents. They're here." The figures didn't move. They just stood there, dozens of them, filling the square. And then one of them, a man in his 50s wearing a work shirt and overalls, stepped forward. He looked directly at me, and his mouth moved. No sound came out, but I could read his lips. "Tell them." "We will," I said aloud. "I promise." The man nodded once, then turned and walked toward the church. The others followed, filing into the building one by one. When the last figure entered, the church doors slammed shut with a sound like thunder. "We need to leave," I said. "Right now." We ran to the vehicles, not looking back. But as we drove away, I saw them in the rearview mirror, standing in the town square watching us go. And above the church, the bell began to ring again. Slow, steady, like a funeral toll. That night, I compiled everything we'd found into a comprehensive report. The Protocol 17 memo, the photographs, the diary entries, the church records. It was damning evidence of a federal conspiracy, and I knew it would cause a firestorm when it became public. I submitted the report to the Bureau's Criminal Division at 800 hours the next morning. By 1100, I received a response. Not from Criminal Division, but from the Office of Professional Responsibility. They wanted to see me immediately. I drove to Harrisburg and was escorted to a conference room. 3 men in suits were waiting. They didn't introduce themselves, didn't show badges. They just sat down and stared at me. "Agent Sloan," one of them said, "we've reviewed your report regarding Eden Hollow. And we have concerns. Serious concerns about the methodology, the evidence, and the conclusions you've drawn. Everything in that report is documented. I have photographs, original documents, multiple witnesses. We're not questioning the documentation. We're questioning the interpretation. You're suggesting that the federal government deliberately killed 47 American citizens. That's an extraordinary claim. It's supported by extraordinary evidence." The man leaned forward. "Let me be clear, Agent Sloan. The Kinzua Dam project was extensively reviewed. Environmental impact studies, legal proceedings, congressional oversight. Thousands of people were relocated safely and compensated fairly. Your theory that some secret protocol existed to erase a town, it's not credible. Then explain the memo. Explain Protocol 17. Internal documents can be misinterpreted. The memo you found likely refers to administrative procedures for handling non-compliant residents. Standard bureaucratic language that sounds more sinister out of context. And the town itself, the 47 people who disappeared. There is no town, Agent Sloan. We've checked. Eden Hollow doesn't exist in any official records because it never existed. What you're seeing is likely the remains of a temporary logging camp or a squatter settlement. People who lived off the grid, avoided census takers, didn't register property deeds. I have photographs of families, diaries, church records, which prove that people lived there at some point. But they don't prove a conspiracy. They don't prove murder." I stared at him, understanding what was happening. They were shutting me down, closing the investigation before it could go any further. "What about my team? They saw everything I saw." The man glanced at his colleagues, then back at me. "Your team has been reassigned. Agent Brennan is transferring to the Seattle office. Agent Monroe is taking a position in cyber crimes. Agent Holt has requested a leave of absence for personal reasons. You're splitting us up. We're optimizing resource allocation. This investigation is closed, Agent Sloan. Eden Hollow is a dead end. We'd like you to move on to other cases. And if I don't?" The silence was heavy. Finally, one of the other men spoke. "Then we'll have to question your fitness for duty, your judgment, your ability to distinguish reality from, let's call it, creative interpretation." It was a threat, subtle, but clear. If I pushed this, my career was over. I left the meeting and drove back to Warren County. I needed to see Eden Hollow one more time, to document everything before the water rose and it disappeared again. But when I reached the access point, Army Corps of Engineers trucks blocked the road. Workers were everywhere, erecting barriers, posting signs. Hazardous area. No trespassing. Martin Cruz was there, supervising the operation. When he saw me, he walked over, his expression apologetic. "They're sealing it off," he said. "Orders from Washington. They're calling it a contaminated site. Old industrial chemicals, hazardous materials. No one's allowed near it." "That's bullshit. There's nothing hazardous about it." "I know, but those are the orders." He lowered his voice. "Between you and me, Agent Sloan, I think they're scared. Scared of what you found, scared of what it means. Did you tell anyone what we saw? The figures, the voices?" He shook his head. "I tried, but when I started talking about it, I got a visit from federal agents. Not FBI, something else. They told me to forget everything, to never mention Eden Hollow again. They said it was a matter of national security." "National security? It's a drowned town." "Maybe. Or maybe it's evidence of something the government doesn't want people to know about." He paused. "I'm retiring next month. 30 years with the Corps, and I've never been told to cover something up before. But that's what this is, Agent Sloan, a cover-up. And you're caught in the middle of it." I thanked him and drove back to my motel. That night, I wrote a second report, this one unofficial, documenting everything the Bureau didn't want to hear. The figures in the town, the changing streets, the voices, the bell. I saved it to a disk and mailed it to a friend who worked as an investigative journalist. If something happened to me, at least the truth would survive. 3 days later, I received a formal reprimand from the Bureau. The investigation into Eden Hollow was officially closed due to insufficient evidence and lack of federal jurisdiction. I was ordered to destroy all documentation and never discuss the case publicly. I refused, and that's when things got worse. The harassment started subtly. My phone would ring at odd hours, no one on the other end. I'd find my apartment door unlocked when I knew I'd locked it. My car would be parked slightly differently than I'd left it. Small things, designed to unsettle rather than threaten. Then it escalated. Files disappeared from my office. Not just Eden Hollow materials, but other cases, personal documents, anything that could be used to discredit me if they decided to move against me directly. My computer was accessed remotely, emails deleted, reports altered. But the worst part was the dreams. Every night, I'd find myself back in Eden Hollow, walking those streets, hearing the bell ring, and in the dreams, I could see the water rising. Slowly at first, then faster, filling the streets, climbing the buildings. I'd try to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I'd try to scream, but no sound would come out. And as the water reached my chest, my neck, my mouth, I'd see Thomas Harmon standing in the square, watching me with those sad, knowing eyes. I'd wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, the taste of lake water in my mouth. I wasn't paranoid. I was being monitored, intimidated, isolated. And I was being psychologically broken down, night by night, dream by dream. On July 2nd, something strange happened. I was driving home from the field office when I noticed a street sign I didn't recognize. It read Maple Street. But I was in Pittsburgh, not Eden Hollow. There was no Maple Street in this neighborhood. I turned onto it anyway, compelled by a feeling I couldn't explain. The street stretched ahead, lined with houses that looked vaguely familiar. At the end of the block, I saw a building that made my blood run cold. It was Harmon's General Store. Not a replica, not something similar. The exact same building I'd seen in Eden Hollow, down to the faded lettering on the sign. I parked and got out, my heart racing. The store looked solid, real, complete with the same broken window I'd photographed weeks ago. But when I approached and tried to open the door, my hand passed through it. The entire building was an illusion, a projection, a memory bleeding into the present. I stumbled back to my car and drove away, checking my rearview mirror constantly. The street was gone. When I circled back, there was no Maple Street, no general store, just a normal Pittsburgh neighborhood with normal street names. Eden Hollow was following me, or I was bringing it with me. I couldn't tell which. I called Brennan that night despite the warnings not to contact the others. I needed to know if I was losing my mind or if this was happening to everyone. "I'm seeing it too," he said quietly. "The town. It appears in Seattle sometimes, usually at night, usually when I'm alone. Streets that shouldn't exist. Buildings that can't be there. And always I hear the bell. What does it mean? I think Harmon was right. We're connected now. Part of us is still there, walking those streets, ringing that bell. And the longer we live, the more the boundary between here and there breaks down. Is there a way to stop it?" Long silence, then. "I don't think so. I think we're claimed, Sloan. We just don't know it yet." On July 3rd, I received a call from Jude Monroe. His voice was shaken, paranoid. "Sloan, we need to talk, not on the phone. Meet me at the diner on Route 6, near Kane, tomorrow at noon." He hung up before I could respond. I drove out the next day, watching my rearview mirror the entire time, looking for tails. But I wasn't just watching for cars anymore. I was watching for streets that shouldn't be there, buildings that couldn't exist, signs that Eden Hollow was manifesting around me. The diner was a rundown place with peeling paint and a gravel parking lot. Monroe's car was already there. Inside, he sat in a back booth, his face drawn and pale. He'd lost weight, and his hands trembled as he drank his coffee. But what disturbed me most was the look in his eyes, hollow, haunted, defeated. "What happened?" I asked, sliding into the seat across from him. "They came to my house," he said quietly. "2 days ago. 3 men in suits. They showed me photographs of my wife, my kids, my parents. Told me they knew where everyone lived, where they worked, where my kids went to school. Then they asked me about Eden Hollow." My blood ran cold. "What did you tell them?" "I told them what they wanted to hear. That I didn't remember much. That maybe we'd been mistaken about what we saw. That it was probably just an old logging camp, nothing important." He looked at me, his eyes filled with shame. "I lied, Sloan. I betrayed everything we found. But they threatened my family. What was I supposed to do?" "You did the right thing," I said. "You protected them." "Did I?" "Because they're not done. They said if I ever talk about Eden Hollow again to anyone, there would be consequences. And they made it clear they'd know if I did." He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But here's the thing, Sloan. After they left, I went upstairs to check on my kids. And my son was drawing. You know what he was drawing?" I didn't want to know, but I asked anyway. "What?" "Eden Hollow, the town square, the church, the fountain. Perfect detail. He's 7 years old and he's never been there, but he drew it like he'd lived there his whole life. And when I asked him about it, he said he dreams about it every night. Said there's a man in the dreams who tells him to remember." My hands clenched into fists. "Thomas Harmon." "I think so. The town isn't just claiming us, Sloan. It's claiming our families, our children. Everyone connected to us is being drawn in. We have to stop it." Monroe laughed bitterly. "How? How do you stop a place that exists outside of time? How do you fight a town that won't stay dead?" "Did I?" "Because they're not done. They said if I ever talk about Eden Hollow again, to anyone, there would be consequences. And they made it clear they'd know if I did." "How?" He pulled out his phone and showed me. There was a photo on the screen, taken from inside his house, showing his wife and children watching TV. The timestamp was from that morning. They're in my house, Sloan. They're watching me, watching my family. I felt a surge of rage. Did you contact local police? And tell them what? That mysterious federal agents are surveilling me? They'd think I'm crazy. And maybe I am, maybe we all are. Maybe none of it was real. It was real. You know it was. Do I? His voice cracked. Because the more I think about it, the more I wonder if we imagined the whole thing. Mass hallucination, environmental toxins, stress-induced delusions. There are explanations, Sloan, rational explanations. You don't believe that. He didn't answer. He just stared at his coffee, his hands shaking. Finally, he said, I'm transferring to Seattle next week. New position, new life. And I'm going to forget about Eden Hollow. I suggest you do the same. He left cash on the table and walked out. I sat there for a long time, processing what he'd said. They'd broken him. Whoever was behind this had found his weakness, his family, and used it against him. And they'd do the same to me if I gave them the chance. I needed to move carefully. If I pushed too hard, I'd disappear just like the residents of Eden Hollow. Over the next week, I tried to contact the others. Brennan didn't return my calls. When I drove to his house, it was empty, sold, according to the neighbor. Holt's phone was disconnected. Her leave of absence had turned into a resignation, and no one at the bureau would tell me where she'd gone. I was alone. On July 10th, I decided to visit Eden Hollow one last time. I knew it was risky. The site was supposedly sealed off, but I needed to see it again, to confirm that it was real, that I hadn't imagined everything. I drove out to the reservoir at night, parking a mile away and hiking in on foot. The barricades were still there, but I found a gap in the fence and slipped through. The exposed lake bed stretched before me, pale and ghostly in the moonlight, and Eden Hollow was gone. Not hidden, not obscured by rising water. Gone. The buildings, the church, the fountain, all of it had vanished. Where the town had stood, there was only smooth mud, undisturbed and empty, as if nothing had ever been there. I stood at the site, my flashlight beam sweeping across the barren lake bed. No foundations, no debris, no evidence that a town had existed here. They'd erased it again, completely. But as I walked across what should have been the town square, I felt something beneath my feet. Not solid ground, but something that gave slightly, like walking on a membrane. And with each step, I heard echoes, distant voices, the ring of a bell, footsteps on invisible streets. I stopped walking and stood perfectly still. The sounds grew louder. I could hear conversations now, people calling to each other, the creak of doors opening and closing, and beneath it all, a low hum, like machinery operating deep underground. I knelt down and pressed my hand to the mud. It was warm, not sun warm, but body warm, like touching living flesh. And I could feel a pulse, slow, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Eden Hollow wasn't gone. It was buried, not under mud, but under reality itself, pushed down into a layer where it couldn't be seen, but could still be felt. And it was still alive, still operating, still waiting. I pulled my hand back and stood up, my heart racing. That's when I noticed the disturbance in the mud, a circular depression, about 3 feet across, exactly where the fountain had been. I approached carefully and saw something carved into the dried clay. A symbol, the same twisted star I'd seen in other cases, in other places where reality had bent wrong. But beneath it, words scratched into the mud. Do not remember us. My hands shook as I photographed it. This was a message, a warning, but the wording was strange. Not don't forget us, which would be a plea for remembrance, but don't remember us, which was the opposite. An instruction to leave them in the dark, to let them fade. Why would the residents of Eden Hollow want to be forgotten, unless they weren't the ones who carved the message? I heard a sound behind me and spun around. A figure stood at the edge of the lake bed, silhouetted against the moonlight. Male, medium build, wearing a suit. He didn't move, just watched. "Who are you?" I called out. The figure raised one hand, pointing at me. Then it pointed down at the ground beneath my feet. Then it turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. I looked down. The mud where I stood had begun to sink, slowly pulling my boots deeper. I tried to step back, but the surface had become viscous, like quicksand. I was being pulled down. Panic surged through me. I threw myself forward, sprawling on more solid ground, and scrambled away from the depression. When I looked back, the area where I'd been standing had collapsed inward, forming a sinkhole about 6 feet across, and from the darkness below, I heard voices calling up, dozens of them, pleading, desperate. "Help us. We're still here. Don't leave us. Please remember." The voices of Eden Hollow, not faded and distant, but immediate and present. They were down there, beneath the mud, beneath reality, trapped in a space that shouldn't exist. And they wanted out. I ran. Didn't stop until I reached my car, my heart pounding, adrenaline surging. I drove straight to the motel, packed my things, and checked out. I couldn't stay in Warren County anymore. It wasn't safe. But as I drove south toward Pittsburgh, I noticed headlights behind me. The same car, maintaining the same distance, for miles. I tried to lose it, took random exits, doubled back, changed routes, but it stayed with me. Finally, I pulled into a busy truck stop and waited. The car drove past without stopping, but I saw the driver's face in the passing headlights. It was one of the men from the Harrisburg meeting, one of the suits who'd shut down my investigation. They were following me, monitoring me, making sure I stayed quiet. I spent the night at the truck stop, sleeping in my car, one hand on my weapon. When morning came, I drove to Pittsburgh and straight to the FBI field office. I needed to report what was happening, to get protection, to force the Bureau to acknowledge the harassment. But when I walked in, my supervisor, a woman named Rachel Cortland, pulled me aside immediately. "Sloan, we need to talk. My office, now." She closed the door behind us and sat down, her expression grave. "I've been reviewing your recent reports. The Eden Hollow investigation, your allegations about a government cover-up, your claims that you're being surveilled. Sloan, I'm concerned." "Concerned about what?" "About your mental state. You've been under a lot of stress. Long hours, difficult cases. And now you're making extraordinary claims without evidence." "I have evidence. I submitted everything. You submitted photographs of an old logging camp, anecdotal accounts that can be explained by environmental factors. And now you're claiming that federal agents are following you, threatening your colleagues, erasing evidence. Sloan, do you hear how that sounds?" "It's true," she sighed. "I'm ordering you to take a mandatory psychological evaluation. 2 weeks, paid leave. You'll meet with Dr. Keller in our Employee Assistance Program, and when you're cleared, we can discuss your future with the Bureau." "You're sidelining me." "I'm helping you. You're a good agent, Sloan, but you're spiraling. And if you don't get help, you're going to destroy your career." I wanted to argue, to demand that she listen, but I knew it was pointless. They'd already made their decision. I was being neutralized, labeled as unstable, removed from active duty. I took the leave. What choice did I have? The psychological evaluation was a joke. Dr. Keller was polite but clearly skeptical. He asked about Eden Hollow, about what I'd seen, about my belief in conspiracy theories. I tried to explain, to present the evidence, but he just nodded and took notes. At the end of the second session, he said, "Agent Sloan, I think you're experiencing a stress-related delusional episode. It's not uncommon in your line of work. The good news is, it's treatable. I'm recommending a course of therapy and possibly medication. I'm not delusional. Of course not. But you're seeing patterns that aren't there, connecting events that aren't related. That's a sign of anxiety-induced hypervigilance. With treatment, you'll feel much better." I left his office knowing I'd never convince him, or anyone else. Eden Hollow was gone. The evidence was destroyed, and I was being gaslit into silence. But I wasn't done yet. I still had the disc I'd mailed to my journalist friend, the complete, uncensored account of everything we'd found. If I couldn't get justice through the Bureau, I'd go public. Expose the cover-up, force someone to listen. I called my friend. His number was disconnected. I drove to his apartment. He'd moved out, suddenly, according to his neighbor. No forwarding address. I tried emailing him. The messages bounced back. Account deleted. They'd gotten to him, too. Whoever was behind this had found everyone connected to Eden Hollow and silenced them, one by one. And I was next. I disappeared on July 14th, '98. Not literally. I didn't vanish into thin air or get abducted by shadowy operatives. I just stopped investigating, stopped asking questions, stopped pushing, because I realized something. I couldn't win. The forces arrayed against me, whether they were government agencies, private contractors, or something else entirely, were too powerful, too organized, too thorough. Every avenue I pursued led to a dead end. Every witness was silenced. Every piece of evidence disappeared. Eden Hollow had been erased twice. First in 1964, when Protocol 17 removed it from official records, and again in 1998, when the truth threatened to resurface. I completed my psychological evaluation and returned to active duty. I took on new cases: bank fraud, kidnapping, white-collar crime. Normal investigations with normal outcomes. I never mentioned Eden Hollow again. Not to colleagues, not to supervisors, not even to my family. But I never forgot. Over the years, I collected fragments. Newspaper articles about the Kinzua Dam, obituaries of Army Corps engineers who'd worked on the project, declassified memos about reservoir construction. Slowly, carefully, I assembled a timeline of what had happened, but I also began noticing patterns. Other disappearances. Other towns that had been flooded for dam projects in the 1960s. Places in Tennessee, Kentucky, North Carolina. Small communities that had resisted relocation, that had been removed from official records, that had drowned when the waters rose. I traveled to these sites during my vacations, my off days, any free time I could find. I walked the shores of reservoirs, looking for signs of what lay beneath, and I found them. At Dale Hollow Lake in Tennessee, I discovered a submerged church steeple that appeared during a drought in 2005. Local historians had no record of a church at that location. When I investigated, I found references to a settlement called Harmony Springs that had been erased from county records in 1961. At Lake Cumberland in Kentucky, a fisherman told me about hearing bells ringing underwater, coming from depths where no bells should exist. He showed me photographs he'd taken, sonar images that revealed structures on the lake bottom, arranged in the pattern of a town. No documentation existed for any settlement at that location. The pattern repeated across the Southeast and Midwest. Thin places, as Thomas Harmon had called them, locations where reality was permeable, where time didn't flow correctly. The government had identified them, erased the communities that protected them, and flooded them. Not just to build dams, but to bury the evidence, to seal away the thin places where the world leaked through. Protocol 17 wasn't just about Eden Hollow. It was a nationwide operation, implemented dozens of times, erasing hundreds of communities and thousands of people. And everywhere I went, I saw the same symbol carved into trees, scratched into rocks, painted on the ruins, the twisted star, a marker left by the guardians, warning others to stay away. In 2008, I started experiencing lost time. I'd be driving and suddenly find myself 3 hours ahead, with no memory of where I'd been. I'd wake up with mud on my shoes and lake water in my car, but no recollection of going anywhere. And always, I'd find photographs on my phone, images I didn't remember taking, showing towns I didn't recognize, streets that shouldn't exist. They were pictures of Eden Hollow, but not the ruins I'd seen in 1998. These showed the town alive, populated, thriving. People walking the streets, lights in windows, smoke from chimneys. And in every photograph somewhere in the frame, I could see myself. Standing in the background, watching. Part of the scene. I was there. Even when I wasn't physically present, some part of me was walking those streets, existing in that impossible space beneath Kinsua Lake. The truth was worse than I'd imagined. Eden Hollow wasn't the only town. Between 1960 and 1965, at least 4 other small communities in the Allegheny region were subject to Protocol 17. Their names were removed from maps, their residents denied compensation, their existence erased. And when the dams filled, they drowned. Hundreds of people, maybe more. All killed through bureaucratic negligence and deliberate erasure. But why? What made these towns special? Why go to such lengths to erase them? I found the answer in a classified report from 1963, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request that took 7 years to process. The report detailed sociological anomalies in certain rural Pennsylvania communities, places where residents showed unusual cohesion, resistance to external authority, and non-standard cultural practices. The government had identified these towns as threats, not military threats, but ideological ones. Communities that operated outside the normal economic and social structures that refused to integrate into modern American life. And when the dam projects provided an opportunity to eliminate them, the government took it. Protocol 17 wasn't just about building dams. It was about social engineering, erasing problematic populations, and covering up the evidence. Eden Hollow was a test case, the first implementation of a protocol that would later be used in other infrastructure projects across the country. And it worked, perfectly. For 33 years, no one knew the town had existed, until the drought. I retired from the FBI in 2012. I'd spent 14 years carrying the weight of what I'd seen, what I knew, what I couldn't prove. I moved to Montana, bought a cabin in the mountains, and tried to forget, but Eden Hollow wouldn't let me go. In 2015, the drought returned, worse than '98. Kinsua Lake dropped to historic lows, exposing vast stretches of lake bed, and Eden Hollow reappeared. This time, it made the news. Local television stations sent reporters. The Army Corps of Engineers issued statements about historical settlements and archaeological preservation. Tourists came to see the drowned town, to walk its streets and photograph its buildings, but none of them understood what they were seeing. None of them realized they were standing in a mass grave. I received calls from journalists, researchers, amateur historians, asking about my 1998 investigation. I deflected, claimed I didn't remember much, blamed faulty documentation. I'd learned my lesson, Silence was survival. But then I received a package. No return address, no note, just a DVD inside. I played it. The footage showed Eden Hollow, but not as ruins. The town was alive. Lights in windows, smoke from chimneys, people walking the streets. The camera panned across the square, capturing dozens of residents going about their daily lives. And then it zoomed in on one figure standing near the fountain. It was me, younger, wearing my FBI windbreaker from 1998. But I was translucent, flickering like the other figures. Part of the town now. The footage cut to black. Then text appeared. "You're one of us, now you were there. You'll always be there." I destroyed the DVD immediately, burned it, crushed the remains, scattered them. But the message was clear. I hadn't escaped. I'd been claimed. Just like the residents, just like anyone who got too close to the truth. Eden Hollow is patient. It waited 33 years to be found. It can wait longer. In 2019, I returned to Warren County. I told myself it was just a visit, to see the area one last time before I got too old to travel. But I knew the truth. I needed to see Eden Hollow again. The town was still there, exposed by years of below-average rainfall. But it had changed. The buildings were more deteriorated, the streets harder to discern. Nature was slowly reclaiming it, covering the evidence with mud and vegetation. I walked through the square, past the general store and the church. Everything felt smaller, less significant. Maybe it had always been this way, and I just built it up in my memory. Maybe Dr. Keller had been right. Maybe it was all a delusion, a pattern I'd imagined. But then I saw it. On the wall of the church, carved into the weathered wood, Agent Sloan, June 26, 1998. He tried to remember. I hadn't carved it. I'd never written my name anywhere in the town. But there it was, in the same handwriting as the diary entries I'd found 21 years earlier. Someone, something, had documented my presence, made me part of Eden Hollow's history, claimed me. I left immediately, drove back to Montana without stopping. And I've spent the last 5 years trying to understand what it means. I think Eden Hollow is more than just a drowned town. I think it's a trap, a place that captures anyone who tries to remember, who tries to bear witness. The residents aren't ghosts. They're recordings, echoes trapped in the buildings and streets replaying their final days endlessly. And anyone who gets too close becomes part of the loop. That's why the government erased it. Not just to cover up a crime, but to prevent others from being claimed. Protocol 17 wasn't just about removing records. It was about creating a memory gap, a barrier that would keep people away. But droughts expose what's hidden, and Eden Hollow keeps emerging, keeps drawing people in, keeps claiming new voices to add to its chorus. I don't know if I'm already trapped, if part of me is there now, walking those streets, calling out warnings that no one will hear. Sometimes I wake up at night and hear the bell ringing, slow and steady. Sometimes I see the town square in my dreams, filled with figures that look familiar. Monroe, Holt, Brennan, all translucent and flickering. And sometimes I see myself, standing near the fountain, my lips moving silently. Do not remember us. Last week, I received a call from the Army Corps of Engineers. They're planning to raise the water level in Kinswa Lake to store more water for the coming years. By next summer, Eden Hollow will be submerged again. This time, they say, permanently. I don't know if I believe them. The town has come back before. It'll come back again. But maybe not in my lifetime. Maybe I'll die before the next drought, before the next exposure. Maybe I'll escape after all. Or maybe I'm already there, trapped in that moment in June 1998, when I first walked into Eden Hollow. Maybe I never left. Maybe I'm still there, walking those streets, documenting those buildings, trying to remember what I've been told to forget.